In the way I see the world, fear stands as humanity's oldest and most commanding emotion. As H.P. Lovecraft once put it, the most primal and piercing of all fears is the fear of the unknown. It's a feeling that murmurs through the shadowed corners of history and bellows from the blood-drenched cobblestones of Yharnam. I'm certain that our eyes have yet to truly open, and that we must, just as Master Willem cautioned his eager pupil Laurence, fear the old blood. To me, this is more than a mere cautionary phrase. It is the beating heart of the narrative, a tale that begins, fittingly, with blood ancient, unholy blood. In the grand cathedral of storytelling, very few works reverberate with the same chilling resonance as Bloodborne. I hold it among the most exquisitely woven stories I have ever encountered, a narrative often celebrated by its followers as nothing short of a masterpiece. And after coming to it in the wake of Elden Ring, I find it sitting at the very peak of the Soulsborne pantheon alongside it. I resist the temptation to pit their storytelling against one another, because I believe each offers something singular and distinctive in its own right. But I can't deny that Bloodborne, approached after Elden Ring, felt hauntingly familiar in ways I didn't expect. So, in this exploration, I want to first walk through the story as I experienced it, fresh, unspoiled, in my very first journey through Bloodborne. Only then will I move to break it apart, to analyze it through the lens of hindsight and understanding. Along the way, there will inevitably be echoes, moments told once from the raw immediacy of playing, and again through the clarity of later reflection. I hope you'll bear with me through these repetitions, because I want to capture the tale not only in its structure, but in the very way it made me feel in those moments. And so, let's begin. Right away, Bloodborne forgoes the opening cutscene but refrains from the usual summarizes of this world's events and histories, unlike Elden Ring or other Souls games. The reason, I believe, is that Bloodborne is actively hiding its actual story for most of the journey, similar to Elden Ring, but it has its twist unique to the game. And although the ambiguous nature of storytelling is similar to Elden Ring, if any of the deep history or cosmic events of the world were mentioned up front, it would not only make the player more confused, but it would also utterly spoil the surprise. So instead, the very first second of the game begins with someone walking up to us, talking about Yharnam and something called pale blood.
Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yharnam is the home of blood ministration. You need only unravel its mystery. But where's an outsider like yourself to begin? Easy, with a bit of Yharnam blood of your own. But first, you'll need a contract.
It's assumed that our character had asked a question to the blood minister, and that the cutscene starts right after. So it's possible, in my view, that our character was trying to seek this pale blood. But given that they're trying to get a blood transfusion, it's also possible that the player is afflicted with some illness and sought out Yharnam because of their extraordinary blood. However, before we're given the blood, we need to sign a contract. Because the blood of Yharnam is so sought after by the rest of the world, it's obviously in high demand. So as payment, the church requires a contract to be signed. But this contract isn't so that we pay them for their services, but rather that we be of service to the people of Yharnam, as thanks for being given their blood. In Yharnam, a strange phenomenon has occurred, as we can see that the town is overrun by beasts. By signing the contract, we become a hunter, and our task is to bring an end to the hunt. So it can be surmised that this hunt we partake in is our end goal. Except, I feel that's not entirely true. It's clear we, the player, didn't come to Yharnam to stop the hunt. We came here for the blood. Our actual objective is much different. However, there is a slight problem. Right after receiving the blood, we wake up, and the first thing we see is a note that reads, "Seek the pale blood and transcend the hunt." This note, for me, highlights a recurring issue with Bloodborne's writing the translations. The first half of this note is, in my opinion, incorrect. From Software. The creators of the game are Japanese, so translation errors are quite frequent in their games. This can sometimes be a few incorrect words or the whole description missing, at least within the English version. Some of the text is wrong. This note doesn't actually say handwritten scrawl. In Japanese, it actually says scribbled in your own handwriting, implying that our character wrote this note. But in the English version, that's not explained, which is why there are constant questions on many forums as to who wrote the note, despite there being a clear answer. This isn't the only translation error Bloodborne has, but it's definitely the most notable one in my book. After the note is read, we head downstairs to fight the very first enemy, and we die. This, however, teleports us to the hunter's dream. The reason we're here is that earlier, before getting up from the table, we hear the blood minister say that we will simply be seeing a bad dream before a beastly figure appears in front of us and is engulfed in flames. Right after, these tiny little white men, which we learn are called messengers, surround our body. These little guys, it seems, worship and aid the hunters in the hunter's dream, and it's because they're connected to the player that we are allowed passage into that hunter's dream. The place's name is a bit misleading, as I see it as a real place, but it's not a real place in the sense that it doesn't exist within Yharnam physically. But it's also not a dream, because we can physically die in here. This may sound extremely confusing, but I do have a theory on this that I'll explain a bit later when we get to the Nightmare Realms. Getting back on track, we discover that we aren't alone in this dream, as there is a doll that becomes our level-up lady. And then there's Gehrman, the first hunter.
Aha, you must be the new hunter. Welcome to the hunter's dream. This will be your home. I am Gehrman, friend to you hunters. You're sure to be in a fine haze about now, but don't think too hard about all of this. Just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for your own good.
The hunter's dream becomes a base of operations for the player, but it was also a base of operations for many other hunters that came before us, as not only are there graves everywhere signifying that people used to be here, but the doll also just straight up tells us this.
Over time, countless hunters have visited this dream. The graves here stand in their memory. It all seems so long ago now.
While we're in here, we finally get to pick our weapons and finish our loadout. For me, Bloodborne handles combat much differently than the other Souls games, and while it may not be intentional, I think this flows quite well with the game's story. Firstly, all the hunters carry a weapon and a gun at all times. However, there isn't much to choose from in this game. Just as a quick comparison, not including the guns, there are only 26 melee weapons the player can use, compared to Dark Souls 1, where 26 weapons just fills up the straight swords and greatswords categories. There's still a dozen other categories of weapons that haven't even been mentioned. Furthermore, the game has also removed armor and changed it to attire. Out of all the clothing in the game, I think there's only one armor set that actually says the word armor on the item, as opposed to robe or garb. So Bloodborne has significantly decreased the quantity of both categories. But you know that saying, quality over quantity? I think Bloodborne ran with this idea. In terms of the way I see it as a hunter, especially when it comes to hunting beasts such as these, mastery of your weapon is not only expected of you, but it's required if you want to stay alive. So by giving the player fewer weapons, it gives them fewer options and possibly more time with one weapon. One of the first weapons available to the player is the flagship Saw Cleaver. I use this weapon the entire game. This is because, in my opinion, Bloodborne's weapons are all about the moveset rather than the damage. The worst weapon based on damage is the Blade of Mercy at 60, with the highest being 105, which belongs to the Kirkhammer. Compared to other games where starting damage can be anywhere from 55 to 160 depending on the weapon, it makes this game's damage difference almost irrelevant. What I'm trying to convey is that I feel the game is almost encouraging you to be a real hunter by dedicating a long time to one weapon. Now, of course, you're free to change to whatever weapon you want whenever you want, as it's quite generous with upgrade materials, but I've always felt this lack of quantity was intentional, so that the player feels like a proper hunter, one who has dedicated time to mastering the inner workings of their weapon. This is further reinforced by the game's trick system, which changes the weapon's form and not only adds more moves to the weapon, but also different combo strings, as you can switch forms mid-combination. As for the attire, on the surface, this may not make sense, but given how the flow of combat works, I think it fits perfectly within this game. In Bloodborne, dodge rolls only exist when not locked on. When in combat, your character does a dash. On top of this, their health loss isn't permanent, as the rally mechanic allows you to regain health back by attacking the enemy. The rally and dash mechanics, to me, try to push the player towards a more aggressive style of play, especially when you take into account the visceral attacks and how some runes can give you health back from them. I believe the game is trying to push you to use your healing items as a last resort, and this quick pace of combat would be impossible if the player was covered in armor. So, Bloodborne removed armor and added attire, since it's a lot lighter and gives the player more freedom of movement. By far, my favorite things to look into is how the gameplay ties into the story, and I feel Bloodborne does a fantastic job at this by giving meaning to the weapons and armor we find in-game. While it may seem trivial, many games don't even bother putting in that effort to justify these things, so when it does occur in cases like Bloodborne, it allows me to be more invested in the story, as everything was taken into account. After selecting our equipment, we can head back and kill the beast that defeated us. Once it's defeated, we can walk outside the clinic and enter central Yharnam. And I have to say, Bloodborne is stunning, not just in the actual design of Yharnam, but in the small details put into the levels as well. Yharnam clearly takes inspiration from the Victorian era, but adds a more Gothic twist to it, as evidenced by the rough and lethal architecture, like the overuse of spikes near letters and the overall neutral color palette the town has. One thing that has irked me on occasion is that most of the Souls games take place in a broken land that is way past its prime, but not a single game has ever actually convinced me that this is the case until I played Bloodborne. Some standout levels like Undead Burg and Farron Keep do an excellent job at conveying this, but Bloodborne carries this feeling throughout the entire game. There is so much death and decay within these areas that you can feel how miserable the people are here. But that's just on the surface, as there are those smaller details I talked about, where within a few minutes after leaving the clinic, you can find a large crowd of the townspeople huddled around a fire pit. The townspeople are also called the Yharnamites, so I'll be using that from now on. This may not seem significant until you realize that in the fire pit is a cross with a beast being crucified on it. This one tiny area shows the disdain people have for these beasts and shows that the hunters aren't the only ones fighting back against the beast's curse. But once again, this also makes sense to me, as hunters are trained to fight these creatures, which is why you normally find them alone. Whereas the Yharnamites are just regular people, so they travel in packs, which is why we fight large numbers of them. These small details continue to get even smaller, as certain characters like the old hunters from the DLC have belts around their right leg. If you notice while playing, our player heals by stabbing something into their right leg. The old hunter trouser reads, "A widespread belief of the period was that beast blood crept up the right leg, and this led to the double-wrapped belt." These design decisions and small details are just like the weapons and attire we previously talked about, details that didn't need much backstory, as the player probably wouldn't have noticed or cared if it wasn't added. But by adding them, it shows me that not only are From Software genuinely good developers, but every detail was taken into consideration. Getting back on track, our objective is still to seek the pale blood and transcend the hunt. However, this is quite obscure and vague, so thankfully, Bloodborne provides a much more approachable and straightforward objective from a note in the hunter's dream that reads, "To escape this dreadful hunter's dream, halt the source of the spreading scourge of beasts, lest the night carry on forever." Even if the previous objective makes zero sense, this at least gives us something to think about and also acts as a justification for our actions. Except there is a slight issue, as not only do the beasts attack us, but the Yharnamites do as well. This is bizarre, as I just talked about how the Yharnamites are taking part in the hunt alongside us, but this is cleared up by the story. It's discovered that the cause of the beasts is from the blood itself. Currently, we don't know why it's the blood or what is in the blood that's causing this problem. We just know that this is the reason why. This feels very typical of Souls games, where questions will be answered with a brief summary that gets more complex and fleshed out as we continue. For now, though, what we uncover is that the blood of Yharnam is more intoxicating than alcohol, and this addiction to blood is what's causing people to seek out more. And since it already has some disastrous side effects, the more someone consumes, the worse it'll get. This may not be the same for all the residents, but if you pay attention to the Bloodborne trailer when the camera zooms in on the eye of the Yharnamite, you can see that their pupil is sort of broken or misshapen, and it also looks eerily similar to the eye of a blood-drunk hunter, the item we use to enter the DLC. And just like the item says, even hunters aren't safe from this inevitable fate. In fact, I think they're worse off than many, as they're constantly killing beasts and surrounded by the hunt. That's why characters like Eileen the Crow exist. When you meet her, she tells us that while we're a hunter of beasts, she's a hunter of hunters. Throughout her questline, we assist her in killing certain hunters who may have been consumed with bloodlust. It's her duty as the hunter of hunters to grant them a merciful death. However, even she is not immune to this fate, as if we don't do her quest line, instead of the Crow of Cainhurst arriving at the Cathedral, she'll be here and attack us instead, implying that she too succumbed to the bloodlust, and it was because of us assisting her in her hunts that we were able to prevent this fate from happening. However, just as the hunters within Bloodborne are unique, so too are the beasts. The first two bosses of Bloodborne are actually, in my opinion, a really great visualization of the effects the blood has on people, as we can find the Cleric beast, a beast we definitely haven't seen before, and Father Gascoigne, a hunter drunk from bloodlust. But it's also here where Bloodborne deviates from the other games in regards to its storytelling. It seems to me that Bloodborne focuses more on context clues for its lore rather than item descriptions. The descriptions do exist, but definitely play less of a role in Bloodborne, compared to the other Souls games, where one boss will have a soul, weapons, and possibly armor tied to it, giving you 7 different pieces of information. In Bloodborne, most of the time you'll just get one, and even then, you're lucky to get that. For example, the Cleric beast drops one item called the Sword Hunter's Badge, where the last sentence reads, as it was clerics transformed into the most hideous beasts. From this item, we can conclude that the clerics, who were a part of the Healing Church, the organization that distributes the blood, were affected by the blood even more than the Yharnamites or possibly the hunters, due to them being near it all day. This caused them to transform into different forms of beasts, which are much different than the ones we find in Yharnam. Even without this item, you probably could have come up with this idea, as the boss's name is Cleric Beast, implying that it's a beast that used to be a cleric. This is the same for Father Gascoigne, who only drops a key to the door behind him. We don't get any lore from him on why he turned into a beast, but given our knowledge on the blood of Yharnam and the beast curse, we can come to the assumption that he was consumed by bloodlust. These are much more tame examples, but it becomes tougher when you talk about bosses like the One Reborn, which drop absolutely nothing regarding its backstory. But because of the area it's located in and the area's history, we can use small bits of lore to piece together our own story about the boss. This will inevitably frustrate players, as the most basic form of lore, that being the boss souls and items, are no longer a viable way to understand the story. But personally, I don't mind the way Bloodborne altered its own way of storytelling. It's definitely more difficult than other Souls games, especially when we get deeper into the game, but it was a nice change of pace, and it forced me to think about my surroundings and actively pay attention. As I said, I didn't mind this, but I can see many people who will be annoyed or even turned off by this, as the game provides even fewer ways to access key items. After defeating Father Gascoigne, we're able to enter the Odin Chapel, and subsequently the Cathedral Ward, an area where the game becomes a bit more open, and that's where I believe the tutorial officially ends. The Cathedral Ward will act as our temporary base of operations, but only in the sense that we're going to be coming back here quite often. From here, the player can explore many different areas like Hemwick, Old Yharnam, and the Forbidden Woods. However, before going to these areas, we need to clear out the Cathedral Ward itself to prevent some backtracking, because at the end of this level is Vicar Amelia. Similar to Father Gascoigne, she doesn't drop much except a pendant, which just tells us that Vicars were heads of the healing church, and this pendant they carry is to remind them of their old adage, which is, fear the old blood. But once again, you didn't need this info, as her story is just like the Cleric beast, someone who transformed into a different beast thanks to the high amounts of blood that were around them. The reason we have to defeat her is so that we can touch the skull behind her, which shows a cutscene of two people talking to one another, that being Master Willem and Laurence. These two will play a massive role later.
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood. I must take my leave.
By the gods, fear it, Laurence.
Afterwards, we can visit Old Yharnam, and this, for me, highlights another wonderful detail about Bloodborne. Not only do the characters and bosses have great stories, but the areas do as well. And it's these locations that assist us in providing backstories to those characters and bosses within the area. Such as in Old Yharnam, where upon entering, we're told to leave.
You there! Hunter! Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once. Old Yharnam, burned and abandoned by men, is now home only to beasts. They are of no harm to those above. Turn back, for the hunter will face the hunt.
Should we refuse, we get shot at by someone atop a tower. We discover that this person is a hunter named Jura. This is the first instance we see of hunters defending the beasts from other hunters, which is quite odd given their whole job is to kill them. But Old Yharnam has quite the tragic backstory. Old Yharnam and its residents were ravaged by a sickness known as ashen blood, and due to its poisonous effects, it caused more of the beast scourge to spread. And because it was spreading too fast, drastic measures needed to be taken. So Old Yharnam was locked away and burned to the ground. This relates to why Jure is protecting them, because he feels guilty for what happened. And assuming you don't anger him like I did, you can talk to him peacefully, and when spoken to, he'll say this:
I no longer dream, but I was once a hunter too. There's nothing more horrific than a hunt. In case you fail to realize, the things you hunt, they're not beasts, they're people. You're not hunting beasts. It's you. You're the beast. Just think about what you're doing. It's utter madness. One day you will see.
For me, the addition of Jura as a character is a masterstroke because it humanizes things in Yharnam, as it shows that there are hunters out there who genuinely care about what they're hunting and feel terrible about it. He realized that the beasts he was trying to kill are just regular people, and even though they're beasts, he can't use that as justification to kill them, especially when you take into account how the people of Old Yharnam were even turned into beasts in the first place. That's why Jura doesn't blame the beasts, but rather the church, as they were inflicted with a disease that was accelerated thanks to the church. And it was the church themselves that deemed the place unlivable, which is why it was sectioned off and burned. It's a horrific but wonderfully crafted story, and a lot of the locations in Bloodborne have incredible backstories that really make you stop and think once you get all the details. For example, after going through a few other areas, we'll eventually make it to Byrgenwerth. I'll just say Byrgenwerth. So, we eventually make it to Byrgenwerth, and it's here where the story of Bloodborne reaches its climax. Byrgenwerth is a place of study here in Yharnam. As we make our way through the building, we can come across a man on a chair, who we will know to be Master Willem, thanks to the flashback from earlier. Master Willem is the head of the Byrgenwerth scholars here in Yharnam, and they made a very disastrous discovery. We don't know what that discovery is, but we'll find out shortly, as while Willem can't speak to us, he does motion us towards the ledge, and by jumping into the water, we enter another plane of existence, with the only thing in here being Rom, the vacuous spider. Killing Rom, I feel, is the start of the mystery. After her death, we see a lady who we will eventually discover to be the undead Pthumerian queen, who's also named Yharnam. After we speak with her, the moon glows a violent red color as it inches closer and closer to us, in fact, so close that the clouds are actually traveling behind it. Thankfully, though, we awake from the terrifying nightmare and are back on the mainland. At least, you can go on believing that, as long as you don't look up. This creature is an amygdala, and it's not only a species of creatures that have existed in Yharnam, it's also been here the whole time we've been playing. You can visit this exact area before reaching Rom, and assuming you're careless enough to not look around, something invisible will grab you and give you a sneak peek of the real story of Yharnam. But this alien creature is just the tip of the iceberg, because I believe Bloodborne was never actually about the hunt. It's about ascension and experimentation, and most importantly of all, it's about the Great Ones. This is where the story of Bloodborne permanently changes, and to help you get up to speed, let me explain what's exactly going on here from my perspective. And don't worry if you get lost or confused along the way. I'll try to summarize the basic details at the end. A Bloodborne story, as I understand it, begins years ago when an ancient race of people called Pthumerians would discover the Great Ones and thus lead to their wisdom of the Eldritch Truth. The Eldritch Truth is basically an umbrella term for the Great Ones. The Pthumerians were able to discover that the Great Ones exist and that they inhabit a higher plane of existence, much higher than our own. All of this pretty much encompasses the Eldritch Truth. Eventually, the Pthumerians would become the eternal guardians of the Great Ones, which is why they're present in the chalice dungeons we enter from the Hunter's Dream, as those are the places they rested. After some time, all the Great Ones ascended to an even higher plane of existence, except Ebrietas, who was the only one left behind. A bit farther in the future, the Pthumerians would establish a government system and elect a monarch who we know to be Queen Yharnam. She ended up having a child who was named Murgo, but Murgo was special as it was a half-human but half-Great One hybrid. Multiple lore descriptions tell us that the Great Ones will inevitably lose their children, so they seek out surrogates. At this point in time, Queen Yharnam would be the surrogate, but other characters will also be affected, like Ariana and Losafka, as killing them drops an umbilical cord.
God, I'm nauseous. Have you felt this? It's progressing. I can see things. I knew it. I'm different. I'm no beast. Oh, God, it feels awful. But it proves that I'm chosen. Don't you see how they writhe inside my head rather rapturous.
Years go by, and we reach the establishment of the Byrgenwerth College. This was led by Master Willem. The scholars of the college would eventually discover those areas we discussed before that we know as Chalice Dungeons and would uncover the history of the Pthumerians, as well as the existence of what they call the Old Blood. This Old Blood is the blood of the Great Ones, and this was the turning point for both Byrgenwerth and Yharnam, as all their time was dedicated to figuring out how to not only communicate with these beings, but also ascend to their level of existence. This led to the scholars testing the Old Blood, but while overseeing the tests, Master Willem feared its effects as they were still unknown.
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the Old Blood.
Fear the Old Blood. That cutscene we saw earlier is when Laurence would leave the college. Laurence believed that the blood was the key to humanity's ascension, as this blood had incredible healing properties. Master Willem, however, still believed that ascending was only possible by lining the brain with eyes, allowing the individual to gain insight into the Great Ones. This, to me, is further reinforced by the creatures we kill in Byrgenwerth, who have multiple eyes, because they're falling out. Many of the scholars in the college were forced to choose who to side with after the split occurred between Master Willem and Laurence. Master Willem would continue his research, while Laurence and the members who followed created the Healing Church. Due to having a proper setup and a base of operations, the method of blood transfusion was quickly discovered. But as we know, this made things worse in Yharnam as it created the Beast's Scourge. So Laurence worked with Gehrman to create the first Hunter's Workshop so they could stop the beasts. Clearly, that didn't work, and the other organizations within the Healing Church would start to take notice. These groups being the Choir and the School of Mensis. Just like the prior groups, the Choir and the School of Mensis also wanted to ascend to a higher plane of existence. But their creation was made shortly after the downfall of the Healing Church, as not only was it proven that the blood was not working as they wanted it to, but Laurence would also pass away, leaving the spot for leader up for grabs. So with the church in ruins and its leader dead, the rest of its members started taking matters into their own hands. The Choir had the advantage of being able to visit Ebrietas, the left-behind Great One, so they tried using her as well as other experiments involving children in their newly built orphanage. They would use these kids and turn them into celestial emissaries with the intention of either being Great Ones themselves or using these emissaries as a way to communicate with the Great Ones so that they could learn more about them. The Choir clothing set says, together with the left-behind Great One, they look to the skies in search of astral signs, as that may lead them to the discovery of their true greatness. They were also able to use what we would call magic, as the Augur of Ebrietas was quite common amongst their ranks. As for the School of Mensis, they were led by Mikolash.
Kos, or some say Cosm. Do you hear our prayers? No, we shall not abandon the dream. No one can catch us. No one can stop us now.
Who also happens to use the same Augur of Ebrietas magic, which may imply that the School of Mensis were originally members of the Choir, or at the very least Mikolash used to be. They're responsible for creating a ritual called the Mensis Ritual, which is an extremely confusing piece of lore that is never actually really explained. Some have said that it has to do with the Snatchers kidnapping people and using those people in their rituals, but there's also information that points to Mikolash using a child, possibly Murgo, to lure the red moon to them. Mensis, maybe a reference to the word month when talking about the moon and its monthly phases, so it seems like the moon was a part of their goal, but to what end is unclear. Regardless, they performed the Mensis ritual and were able to create the Nightmare of Mensis, a nightmare realm I will get to later. Within this realm, though, are Queen Yharnam and her son Murgo, which is quite peculiar. Basically, though, all of these groups separated due to their differing ideals and would even sabotage each other at times, as we can summon a Mensis student to fight Ebrietas, who, of course, we know is affiliated with the choir. And to even get into the choir's orphanage, we need to find a key to the Upper Cathedral ward, which is located on a corpse in a cage, which is in Yahargul, run by the School of Mensis. While this division in the church was occurring, one rogue scholar would reach out to Castle Cainhurst, a place that had already existed for quite some time, and would then travel there to share their blood discoveries with them. The healing church would catch wind of this betrayal and spin a story that basically caused a holy crusade, as they claimed that Castle Cainhurst were creating vile beasts and needed to be stopped. This led to the creation of a group of hunters called the Executioners who assaulted the castle. The only problem is that the queen of the castle, Annalise, is immortal. To my knowledge, this is never explained but has been the basis of many theories. This immortality caused a problem because they couldn't kill the source of the vile bloods, which is why Logarius, leader of the Executioners, can be seen in front of the throne room as he locked her away permanently and guards the room so that no one may enter to free her. This also leads into Alfred's questline, who is also an executioner and is way more than delighted to see the queen there.
She pink pulp. There, you filthy monstrosity. What good's your immortality now? Try stirring up trouble in this sorry state. All mangled and twisted, with every inside on the outside for all the world to see.
You, is it? Look at this. Thanks to you, I've done it. Well, isn't it wonderful? Now Master can be canonized as a true martyr. I've done it. I have. I've done it.
So, quickly let me summarize what I just said from my understanding. Basically, Byrgenwerth found the tombs we know as chalice dungeons, which led to the discovery of the Great Ones and the Old Blood. The goal from then was how to ascend to a higher plane of existence. The methods of ascension are what created the different groups. Byrgenwerth, led by Master Willem, believed lining one's brain with eyes would give the person insight. This is, once again, reinforced by the multi-aid creatures at Byrgenwerth. Laurence, founder of the Healing Church, believed the Old Blood was the key to ascension. Within this church were two groups of hunters, the official hunters, led by Gehrman, who were created to stop the beast curse from spreading, and then the executioners, who were created to put down the people of Castle Cainhurst, as they believed they were evil. The last two groups were the former members of the church. The choir wanted to use Ebrietas and their creation of the celestial emissaries as a means of ascension, although once again, it is still unclear whether the members of the choir wanted to become celestial emissaries or were just using them as a communication device to communicate with the Great Ones. And then finally was the School of Mensis, who kidnapped people and used them in obscene rituals and were somehow able to create the nightmare realm of Mensis that contains Queen Yharnam and her hybrid son Murgo. this is just a small part of Bloodborne's story. Not only is there so much we haven't discovered yet, but there are some details I left out of the previous topics for the sake of brevity and organization. There is genuinely so much to talk about because this fundamentally changes how we see this game. I do want to clarify, you don't learn all this info I just explained after killing Rom. The only reason I waited until her death to explain the full story is because the proper context was needed, as now we can reanalyze our current knowledge and connect it to this new discovery. Like Rom herself, who seems to be just a spider until you realize that Rom was originally a scholar at Byrgenwerth, who evolved into a great one, courtesy of Kos. Or even how many of the hunters and notable figures in the game wear blindfolds. This could be based on a theory within the game's world that the Scourge Beast Plague causes people to lose their eyesight, but could also be a way for the person to prevent going mad from seeing the Great Ones, which also connects into the insight mechanic. These ideas could be completely wrong, but that's, in my opinion, is the testament to how detailed the world building of Bloodborne really is. But like I said before, we're not even done with the game's story, as there is so much more to uncover. But now we're starting to enter questionable territory. If there was ever one massive fault in Bloodborne's story for me, it's the lack of elaboration, or just even a simple explanation related to some of the events and locations in the game, similar to how it is in Elden Ring. But it's a contradiction within myself that I both love and hate with these games. We briefly mentioned this before with some of the bosses like the One Reborn, who don't have a concrete backstory. But thanks to the history of Yahar'gul, we're able to come up with a compelling theory based on this information. This, however, is not the same when discussing the Nightmare Realms. Bloodborne has this fascination with dreams and nightmares, as across the game, we'll end up visiting 4 locations called the Hunter's Dream, Hunter's Nightmare, Nightmare Frontier, and the Nightmare of Mensis. Just about all of them, minus the Hunter's Nightmare to an extent, are extremely confusing and very difficult to wrap your brain around. Once again, we're going to have to rely on context clues in the environment to help us come up with a theory. But there's even less to go off of within these realms, as they're completely separate from reality. Each of these places has a host, and its location is unknown, but it's assumed to be in a different plane of existence. But the location of this new plane is possibly closer than we think, as we can see the Cathedral ward underneath the fishing hamlet in the Hunter's Nightmare, as well as being able to see the Nightmare of Mensis from the Nightmare Frontier. It's extremely confusing, as it seems that these places could operate like Yahar'gul and are just simply an unseen village, or do exist but are unable to be perceived by normal humans. Or maybe it's something else entirely. One thing that is for certain is that there is a host that created this specific realm for a specific reason. However, for some of them, we still don't know why. This is great, as it gets the community talking, but theory crafting is only useful when there's a set amount of facts from which to build off of. But when it comes to these realms, there's very little to even start with. Many have pointed out how these realms are very similar to H.P. Lovecraft's Dreamlands, which, in case you weren't aware, H.P. Lovecraft was a massive inspiration for this game, and many other Souls games, with Elden Ring as the latest. According to some of my research on this topic, the Dreamlands are alternate dimensions only accessible to humans through dreams. There's also a mention of the waking world, which is just the present realm the characters are in. So, relating this to Bloodborne, current-day Yharnam would be our waking world, and all these other realms we visit are just the Dreamlands. But once again, the question still remains, how did these realms even come to be? Well, to start, we have to talk about the Nightmare of Mensis. To access this realm, we have to touch Mekalash, who is clearly dead amongst the other members of the group. This nightmare seemed to take in things from the real world and put them in the nightmare, not completely removing them from Yharnam, but more like duplicating them, as the lecture building seemed to belong in Yharnam originally. After exiting the lecture building, we can officially make it to the nightmare, and it's clear this group does not want to be disturbed, as protecting the gates is this beam of light which comes from the brain of Mensis. The nightmare of Mensis is interesting because it tries to convey to the player how time works, although admittedly, it does that quite poorly in my opinion. Another example of this is the Chalice dungeons. These dungeons are extremely unique, as you can fight bosses like Rom inside of them. This is very confusing already, but to add even more confusion to the mix, in the boss fight arena for Ebrietas called the Altar of Despair, it looks like Ebrietas is bent over crying when looking in the direction of what seems to be Rom's corpse. So we have a dead Rom in the Altar of Despair, and 2 live Roms, one in the Chalice dungeon and one underneath the Great Lake at Byrgenwerth. The only explanation that I've come to is that it's related to time and the ability to be in multiple places at one time. While I have no way to explain the Chalice dungeons other than these places being a time in history that has been frozen. As for the other 2 parts of Rom, the one in the Altar of Despair seems to be the real Rom, and the one at the lake is also the real Rom, but not physically. Just like how Michaelash is dead in Yahargul, but very much alive in the nightmare. It seems that these realms work very differently when it comes to time as well as the physical body. It's also even more confusing when you consider that there are different hosts per realm, and the ways of entry are different per realm. Michaelash more than likely can't enter the hunter's dream, as he's not a hunter. We can't enter the hunter's nightmare without the eye of a blood-drunk hunter item, as we'll see when we discuss the DLC. The hunter's nightmare is for hunters who become drunk with bloodlust, so if you don't fit the criteria, you can't enter, which is why we need the item to gain entry to it. So how does Rom fit with all of this? Well, many within the community believe that all these planes of existences are on layers. If we use Yharnam as layer 1, then this place where Rom exists is layer 0. We eventually discover that we can see the cathedral from the hunter's nightmare, making that above it at layer 2. There's even a possible theory that the amygdala in the hunter's nightmare fell from the nightmare frontier since it's the boss of that area, making that place layer 3. Continuing further, many may speculate that the nightmare frontier is connected to the nightmare of Mensis due to its close proximity, and the fact that the lecture building connects the 2 places, making the nightmare of Mensis just either the top layer of layer 3, or maybe even its own at number 4. As for the hunter's dream, I believe it to be the highest layer within the realms that we know of, as the ending of the game kind of backs this up a bit. I really do like this theory a lot, although it's simply just a theory, and it's impossible to know if this is truly correct. But it's clear that the things in these realms are not on the same system as Yharnam. Circling back to the nightmare of Mensis, we know that Michaelash is the host of the nightmare, evident by his name, so killing him would stop the nightmare. Except that doesn't happen. To once again relate this to the hunter's nightmare, the only way to stop that nightmare is to kill Kos, because that is the host. The Orphan of Kos is not the host, as the nightmare doesn't end until you kill the black spirit lingering above Kos itself. But with the nightmare of Mensis, it doesn't stop when you kill Michaelash, as there is still another boss left, that being Murgo's wet nurse. The wet nurse is protecting Murgo, and it's only by killing Murgo that things actually end. Technically, you can revisit these realms even though the host is dead, so I just chalked it up to game design, as technically within lore, they should be gone. So it seems that these realms operate differently depending on its inhabitants. Both of the realms officially end when the Great One in their respective realms is killed. So it's possible that the Great Ones hold more power in these realms despite not being the host in the case of Murgo. Although, to be fair, the Nightmare of Mensis was made so that Michaelash and the students of Mensis could communicate with Murgo. So maybe there's a loophole there. This is what I meant earlier when I talked about Bloodborne's biggest issue, because these past couple of minutes have just been complete speculation. This whole theory has no amount of truth to it since it's simply just a theory. There is nothing wrong with leaving things up to interpretation and allowing the community to answer the mystery on their own. But I feel like there was something really lacking here when it came to these realms, it is probably one of my favorite pieces of lore to look into, though, as there are so many diverse ideas. But there's also an issue because due to this lack of explanation, the community can't really agree on anything concrete as a base. Thus you have many outlandish ideas, like people thinking the realms are different planets, or Yharnam is actually a realm in itself and the real Yharnam is something we don't get to see. Or, who knows, maybe my theory is completely outlandish and those are more centered in facts. It's all over the place. Despite the obvious issue, the idea of these realms and how they are planes that exist that you aren't able to see by normal means is such a cool concept and further solidifies my previous statement that Bloodborne's world building is insanely detailed. And even something like the nightmare realms are able to be discussed thoroughly because the idea of what these places are and what they actually mean intrigues enough people to want to uncover the real truth. These realms could have simply been boring ideas and places that the players could deem unworthy to even bother mentioning, but it's due to the writing of the rest of the game that makes the very idea of trying to uncover the full story, even including the nightmare realms, almost mesmerizing. At this point in the game, the only boss that stands in our way is Murgo's wet nurse, but killing the nurse leads to the game's ending. So before we get into that ending, we have to discuss the DLC. Bloodborne only came with one DLC called The Old Hunters. This DLC takes place in the Hunter's Nightmare, which, as we discussed, is a nightmare realm created by a specific host for a specific reason. The purpose of this place is to give the hunters who succumb to bloodlust a place to go, which sounds rather wholesome until you discover why the Hunter's Nightmare was created. Pretty early in Bloodborne's timeline, in the order of events we previously discussed, we have that era where the college was founded, and then the old blood was found along with the Thumerian tombs, and then afterwards the college would then split up because of all the different ideologies, leading to the creation of things like the Healing Church and the School of Mensis. Well, the Hunter's Nightmare was created in between these two events, so it was before the creation of the Healing Church, meaning the beast curse had still yet to take form, as Laurence was still testing the blood's effects. So this realm is years old at this point, possibly the oldest realm we could visit in-game. But this realm was created as a curse against the college and the hunters for what they did during the early stages of experimentation and research. At the college, Master Willem would receive word of a washed-up Great One at a nearby fishing village. This Great One was known as Kos, the same one Michaelash refers to during his boss fight. As you once did for the vacuous Rom, it seems that Rom ascended to the spider form thanks to Kos, but given the word, vacuous, is just another way to say lack of intelligence. It was probably out of punishment for what occurred at the village. Master Willem, upon hearing this news, immediately sent scholars and hunters to investigate, and the reports were true. A Great One did exist within the village. But even though they were turned into fish, they revered Kos and saw her as a god. In an attempt to investigate this being's power further, the hunters and scholars brutally destroyed Kos's body, and even did the same to some of the villagers. It's reported that they carved large, gaping holes in the skulls of the villagers, and also violated Kos's corpse by possibly dissecting her skin and organs. But Kos is a Great One, and even though a Great One's body may die, its mind can continue to live on. Because she was still alive, in a roundabout way, she was able to put a curse on all the scholars and hunters. All hunters, and on occasion random people as well, will be cast into the nightmare for eternity, engaging in endless hunting forever. This is the fate for all hunters, as after enough time, the bloodlust will consume them, so it's inevitable that they end up here. We can enter the hunter's nightmare and put a stop to it by eliminating Kos. However, her child will appear upon arriving at the beach and fight us. It's only after defeating the orphan of Kos that we can slay the black spirit residing in Kos, which destroys the nightmare. But we have quite a few ways to go before getting there, as we have 4 bosses to get through first. One thing you'll notice about the Old Hunters DLC is that the setting is identical to the Cathedral ward, minus the massive chunks of debris everywhere. The reason why the Cathedral ward is here, I believe, is that the hunter's nightmare is pulling in all the locations of tragedy. The fishing village is here, which is where the massacre took place, and the Cathedral ward was the base of operations for the church, who unleashed the beast Curse upon Yharnam. So it got pulled in here too. Some have theorized that the debris everywhere is the lack of knowledge the brain has when dreaming. If you think of a memory from yesterday, it's a lot more vivid than one from a few years ago. Over time, you'll forget small parts of that memory until it becomes impossible to remember. Someone made a really great analogy that this area is like the Cathedral ward, except the person assigned to making the buildings didn't have the blueprints. It's impossible to remember every single detail in the Cathedral ward, which is why parts of it seem to be missing. I really like how this environment ties into the real-world examples of how dreams and memories work within our brains. The first boss we find in the nightmare is this fiery cleric beast who we can't fight just yet, so by passing him and going the other way, we can make it to Ludwig the Accursed.
Please, help us. Beast. The great terror looms. Have mercy. Have mercy upon us.
Just based on his appearance, it's clear that Ludwig has been here for quite some time. Ludwig was actually the first hunter of the Healing Church workshop. This is different compared to Gehrman, who was the actual first ever hunter. Once Laurence split from the college, they needed to enlist the help of the hunters, which led to the creation of the Hunter's Workshop, which was of course run by Gehrman. However, the Yharnamites grew wary of the church and the workshop and believed that the church had something to do with the beasts. So Laurence shut down the workshop due to Gehrman and the other hunters' failure to quell the threat. Laurence then created the new Healing Church workshop and enlisted different hunters to help him. This failure also ties into Gehrman quite a bit when discussing the ending, but we'll get to that later. Ludwig was one of the early hunters of the Healing Church workshop, and because he was one of those early hunters, over time, he succumbed to the blood and, due to the curse being created by Kos, was forced to live here for eternity.
Tell me, good hunter of the church, have you seen the light? Are my church hunters the honorable Spartans? I hoped they would be. Ah, good. That is a relief. To know I did not suffer such denigration for nothing. Thank you kindly. Now I may sleep in peace. Even in this darkest of nights, I see the moonlight.
This is the same reason this fiery cleric beast is here, as this is Laurence, the same Laurence who created the Healing Church, and the one who believed blood ministration was the key to ascension, is now eternally stuck in the hunter's nightmare. I really like the idea of making him a cleric beast, as he was obviously a high-ranking member in the church, just like the Vicars and clerics, so it makes sense why their appearances would be similar. even activate this fight, we need to find Laurence's skull in the nightmare, which is way closer than you think, as we can use this lift, and by letting it go up, we can find it underneath the original lift. His skull reads a symbol of Laurence's past and what he failed to protect. He is destined to seek his skull, but even if he found it, it would never restore his memories. So Laurence, the leader of the church, has now become nothing but a mindless beast, the very thing he unleashed upon the people of Yharnam, which I find to be quite an ironic fate. The next area we visit is the research hall, and this location was where many patients of Yharnam were being experimented on with the same purpose of ascending. This is backed up by the pale skin, similar to those who are considered kin. And at the top of this building is a garden with the living failures. These flowers in the garden were similar to the flowers in the Celestial Emissary Arena, so it's possible that these patients were being used to create celestial emissaries. But the majority of them failed, and even the ones that did succeed the first step couldn't become emissaries, which is why they're called the living failures. But what's odd, though, is that throughout this area, we hear people call out to a Lady Maria, who conveniently is our last boss.
A corpse should be left well alone. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will kill you now. From your wild curiosity.
Lady Maria was one of the hunters present for the massacre at the fishing village. She regretted her actions deeply and thus decided to dedicate her time to watching over the patients and taking care of them. We know this, as her rakuyo, the weapon she commonly uses, can be found in-game at the bottom of a well, implying that throwing away this blade was not only her trying to forget this horrific event, but also her giving up her hunter status.
Please, just kill me. Free me from this place before I go mad.
Someone help me. I'm guilty. I know. But I won't do it again. I promise. The dumb darkness. It frightens me. And what rises from its very depths.
Lady Maria, please take my hand. Please help me. Don't let me drown.
Is that you, Lady Maria? No. You're someone else. Please, could you do something for me? I need brain fluid. Murky, mushy brain fluid.
Which led to her being the permanent caretaker of the research hall. It's unclear how long she did this for, but she would eventually kill herself over this guilt, evident by the bloodstain on her clothes, implying that she slit her throat. Once again, due to the curse, she would then be sent to the hunter's nightmare for eternity. We also discover that Lady Maria is related to Queen Annalise, the same one at Castle Cainhurst. I don't think there's any more development into this discovery, but I still think it is nice to know Lady Maria is the one hiding the secret of the hunter's nightmare. And by killing her, we can walk through the fishing village and uncover the real truth. This would then lead us to Kos, and if you manage to kill her, then you can end the hunter's nightmare permanently, allowing everyone inside to finally achieve peace.
This may sound strange, but have I somehow changed? Moments ago, from some place, perhaps deep within, I sensed a liberation from heavy shackles. Not that I would know How passing strange.
The DLC for Bloodborne was just like its weapons. There was a clear attention to its quality rather than its quantity. The Old Hunters is not a long DLC and took no longer than 4 hours to complete, but each of those 4 hours was, for me, not only filled with engaging gameplay, but also important pieces of lore that fill in some holes in the game's narrative. It's a fantastic DLC and a necessity if you plan on playing this game. Returning to Yharnam, we can now go back to the Nightmare of Mensis to defeat Murgo. Murgo might have one of the most important roles in this game's story. The School of Mensis obtained an umbilical cord from a Great One and used this to communicate with Murgo, but things went wrong and resulted in the stillbirth of their brains, which is why they're all dead. It's unclear why Mikolash is the only one alive, but maybe it's because he was the one who used the cord and thus is alive in the nightmare realm, but dead in the real world. But once again, we're entering that questionable territory. The reason we know this is because an umbilical cord drops after killing Murgo. These umbilical cords are key to the game's secret ending. After killing Murgo's wet nurse, the game pauses for a moment, and all we hear is a baby crying. After the crying is done, we finally get the Nightmare Slain title to appear. This implies to me that it wasn't the wet nurse who was the objective, but rather Murgo himself. Also, something interesting is that Queen Yharnam is outside the boss arena, and upon killing Murgo, she bows and disappears. This may tie into what we discussed with Rom, on how she is dead but alive in the lake. It's possible that she thanks us for finally ending Murgo and subsequently her misery, as they were stuck in these realms despite assumingly being dead already. Just like the Old Hunters, it's possible that we were finally able to give the mother and child the peace they needed to move on. Regardless, with Murgo dead, we return to the Hunter's dream, and it's on fire. Talking with the doll, she motions us towards the great tree where Gehrman is located.
Good Hunter, you've done well. The night is near its end. Now, I will show you mercy. You will die, forget the dream, and awake under the morning sun. You will be freed from this terrible hunter's dream.
Here is where we can get into the endings of Bloodborne. And there are 3 of them to discuss. Starting with the first one, this sees us accepting Gehrman's proposal. When we talk to Gehrman, he claims to offer us a way out of the hunter's dream. He's going to kill us, which will allow us to be free of the hunt and the dream altogether. Should we accept, he decapitates us, and we awaken in a more peaceful version of Yharnam. Afterward, we can see the Dole praying at our grave and hoping that we find worth in the waking world. Earlier, we talked about how Yharnam was the waking world, and how these nightmare realms were the dreamlands, at least according to H.P. Lovecraft. Well, this changes things, as this implies that the Yharnam we explore is just another realm, and the real Yharnam is the one at the end of the game, as the Dole calls it the waking world.
Oh, good hunter. I can hear Gehrman sleeping. This grave stands in memory of a hunter I once knew. Though enchanted by the dream, he remained strong and eventually saw the light of dawn. I pray that you found meaning and comfort in the waking world.
There's always been one thing that's bothered me about this game, and it's the dream itself. This is the one base of operations across the Souls games where nobody appears in the base. We only have the Dole and Gehrman. No one else comes into this dream, but we can tell from the graves that others have come before us. But it seems that not every hunter has been to the dream. The only hunters that have been confirmed to be in the dream are Eileen and Jura due to some of their dialogue. It's possible that the hunter's dream is used by one hunter at a time in order to stop the hunt. Given how many graves there are, and that we see the Dole pray near ours after the first ending, we can assume that these other hunters were possibly a part of the dream, but were killed by Gehrman and given his mercy. In the case of Eileen and Jura, maybe they're already dead. Remember how we talked about Rom being dead and alive at the same time? maybe by accepting Gehrman's mercy, we become like Eileen and Jura. We're still hunters that are still partaking in the hunt, but with little to no memory of the hunter's dream, and are able to finally be free of its never-ending curse. Remember, the only reason we're here in the dream is the messengers, and from playing the game, we can assume that no one really knows what these are. I believe it's tied to the Great One we'll see in just a bit, so maybe this Yharnam really is the same Yharnam as before, but we're just unaware of the real story. Ignorance is bliss, after all. The second ending is activated upon refusing his offer.
Dear, oh dear. What was it? The hunt? The blood? Or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt.
Gehrman doesn't take no for an answer and battles us. If we defeat Gehrman, we finally get to see the real boss of Bloodborne, the real mystery of Bloodborne. This is the pale blood we've been seeking, and it's called the Moon Presence. If you've been connecting some of the dots earlier, I said that each realm has a host, like Murgo and Kos. Well, this is the host of the hunter's dream. This Moon Presence is related to the umbilical cords. It's known that these umbilical cords are sort of communication devices used by humans to talk to the Great Ones. It's unclear how this happened or even if this happened, but it's assumed that the umbilical cord came from Kos and was split into 3 pieces. Willem took the first piece, Laurence and the church got the second, and Mikolash and the school got the third. Well, during the events of the healing church, Laurence worked with Gehrman to contain the threat of the beasts. From multiple different armor sets and items, we can piece together that Gehrman had a deep love for Maria, but it seemed like Maria just respected him as a teacher and a friend. Gehrman never really managed to confess his love to her, and even if he somehow managed later to muster up the courage to do so, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because Maria took her own life. In a desperate attempt to keep her alive, Gehrman created the doll. That's why we see a doll in the original Hunter's workshop in Yharnam. Within the workshop is a small hairpiece that has a line in the description that reads, "Its color would stand most brilliantly against a head of grayish hair." Gray is the same color as Maria's hair, which is also the same color as the doll's hair. When we give the item to her with an innocent shock, she says,
What? What is this? I can't remember. Not a thing, only I feel. A yearning, something I never felt before. What's happening to me? Tell me, Hunter, could this be joy? Have I somehow changed? Moments ago, from some place, perhaps deep within, I sensed a liberation from heavy shackles. Not that I would know. How passing strange.
When we kill Maria and return to the hunter's dream and talk to the doll, she says that she feels liberated, as if the great shackles have been lifted off her, implying that she was made to be a replacement for Maria. Around this time, the church was failing, the hunters were failing, and Gehrman had no motivation to keep going, having just lost the one he loved. So Laurence pitched an idea, and Gehrman would agree. They would use their third of the umbilical cord and ask a Great One for help. This cord, which is the one we find in the hunter's workshop, reads, "The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream." The pale moon, also known as the moon presence, is the host of the hunter's dream. It's unclear what the rules of the contract were, but it's assumed that Laurence and Gehrman probably wanted a way to defeat the scourge beasts. But contracts go both ways. The moon presence would keep Gehrman in the hunter's dream with the intention of training the hunters and continuing the hunt. It's been debated since the release of the game what the actual motivation of the moon presence is. This has been the biggest discussion amongst the community, and it's never gotten anywhere in my view. Going back to H.P. Lovecraft, it's very clear that the Great Ones are the same ones from his stories. The issue here is that the Great Ones were created to be incomprehensible in every way, meaning not only can we not even begin to understand what it even looks like, but not even what it wants. Despite some of the beings having the same title, the Great Ones each have different motivations and reasons for doing what it does, meaning its actions aren't like those of the college where they wanted all of humanity to ascend. The Great Ones seem to act purely out of self-interest. But as we know from the umbilical cords, all Great Ones lose their children and yearn for a surrogate. Maybe the moon presence just wants a child. This relates to Ending 2, where we refuse Gehrman's offer and then meet the moon presence, but it takes us in and replaces Gehrman with us.
You will be freed from this terrible hunter's dream. Dear, oh dear, what was it? The hunt, the blood, or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt.
And so, the hunt begins again.
We are now the new helper of hunters within the dream. Maybe it wants a child, but in a different way. Not an infant like Murgo, but a grown one to watch over, which would be us. Maybe it wants to keep the beast scourge going so that more hunters will arrive at the hunter's dream, thus giving the place a purpose to exist and allowing the moon presence to watch over the fight and watch over us. Remember, the moon presence only arrives once we defeat Gehrman, so it's detected that something has happened, which is why it meets with us. It then realizes our power and seizes the opportunity to have a new helper in the dream. Many of the NPCs say that the night of the hunt is unending and that it's going on longer than usual. Maybe this is to be seen as quite literal, that the hunt will last forever as long as the moon presence exists. While there has been a lot of speculation on this, one thing we can confirm though is that this dream is not actually a dream, as Gehrman has some unique dialogue that you may hear, and it's quite disturbing.
Oh, Laurence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please. Anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please.
For my interpretation of this either means that Gehrman realized he'll be stuck here forever since Laurence and Willem are not in any state to come free him from the dream, or that he was brought here against his will. Either way, we need to stop the moon presence, and thankfully, there is a way. Should the player consume the 3 umbilical cords, that being the one from Murgo, the one from the old hunter's workshop, and then the last one from either Ariana or Losefka, they can trigger the secret ending.
Are you cold? Oh, good hunter.
Instead of being enthralled by its presence and becoming the new Gehrman, we resist its power. The moon presence will then see us as a threat and attempt to get rid of us. If we win, we become an infant Great One and do exactly what everyone has been trying to do for years. We finally did it. We discovered the true path to ascension, and with this profound knowledge in mind, we can now launch humanity into its next childhood. As I said, the motivation for the moon presence is unknown and will likely never be known, so it's up to our interpretation. But after this, though, we officially come to the end of the story of Bloodborne. I don't believe a tale needs to spell out every detail in order to be powerful or complete. Sometimes, leaving deliberate spaces for the audience to fill enriches the experience. And this is, perhaps, my favorite aspect of Bloodborne's narrative. Similar to Elden Ring, the freedom to take an existing work, whether from literature, film, or games, and weave in my own interpretation, my own ending, my own connections until the story becomes partly my own. And now, as I promised in the beginning, I'll try to analyze and piece together the whole story and lore of Bloodborne in a more concise and coherent manner, as I have begun to understand it after playing the game, and searching through the wikis about all the stories and lores I didn't understand or missed. If you have stayed here till now, I would like to give you a heartfelt thank you and to remind you to like and subscribe if you have enjoyed. And with that, let's begin again. In my reading of the world, it is fear that reigns as mankind's oldest and most potent emotion, and as said by H.P. Lovecraft, the most visceral of all fears is that of the unknown. It is a sentiment that whispers in the dark corners of history and screams from the blood-soaked stones of Yharnam. I am convinced our eyes are yet to open and that we must, as Master Willem once warned his ambitious student Laurence, fear the old blood. I believe the genesis of this entire tragedy lies deep below the city of Yharnam, within the ancient, sprawling underground labyrinth of Thumaru, which many now know as the Chalice Dungeons. It is my understanding that this old labyrinth was carved out by the Pithemirians, beings I can only describe as superhuman, who are said to have unearthed a sinister truth. The Hunters, in their grim wisdom, had another name for this labyrinth. They called it the Tomb of the Gods. I feel this is because, deep within its recesses, they discovered traces of godlike entities they named the Great Ones. My interpretation is that the Great Ones were beings of immense power, able to function on what I see as transcendental planes of thought in my view. This means they had elevated their consciousness beyond the confines of the physical realm. The specific advantages of operating on this plane remain unclear to me. Perhaps it was a quest for immortality, or maybe it was for power, as I've seen evidence that even from beyond, the Great Ones could meddle with the lives and events of the waking world. Whatever the reason, I am certain that some form of ascension occurred, as numerous references point to certain Great Ones being left behind. To my eyes, the slugs found in the nooks and crannies of the old labyrinth are the clearest signs of these left-behind Great Ones. One such being, it appears to me, is Ebrietas, an abandoned Great One who seemingly failed to ascend with her kin. I believe it was only a matter of time before Ebrietas was discovered by the humans above, sparking a crusade that, in my telling of the story, begins with a man named Willem. In my view, Master Willem was the central figure at a prestigious institution of learning, Byrgenwerth. This place, nestled by a tranquil lake and hidden within a vast forest, housed the very minds that would go on to reshape the world. It seems to me that everything held sacred in Yharnam can ultimately be traced back to Byrgenwerth, including the 5 characters I see as most pivotal to this story. These figures, as I see them, are Master Willem, Runesmith Carol, Laurence, Mikolash, and Gehrman. I will introduce them as they become relevant to my telling of this narrative. As I've stated, Master Willem was the head of the school at Byrgenwerth. I see him as a man obsessed with truth, one who believed in pushing the very limits of what it meant to be human. In nearly every description I've found, Willem is referred to as Master or Provost, which tells me he commanded a great deal of respect. It's my belief that while many would eventually stray from his teachings, few could deny that they owed everything to his research, for it was under Willem's watch at Byrgenwerth that scholars made what I can only call terrific discoveries in the tombs beneath Yharnam. I understand that a group of young Byrgenwerth scholars eventually uncovered a holy medium deep within a tomb. This discovery, I believe, led directly to the founding of the Healing Church and the establishment of blood healing. It's difficult to be certain what exactly they found, but I am convinced it was connected to the Great Ones. We find evidence of this on the ground floor of Byrgenwerth College in the form of pearl slugs, which I see as remnants of the Great Ones. At the very top of the college, we find the empty phantasm shell, an invertebrate shell that is said to have been the familiar of a Great One. Following this discovery, whatever it was that proved the existence of the Great Ones, it seems to me the Byrgenwerth scholars launched a full-scale inquiry into these beings and the old blood. From this point forward, I see an explosion of lore and history, all stemming from what the scholars found in those Yharnam tomes. Many of these insights, I believe, come from Runesmith Carol, the second character in my account. I am told Carol transcribed the inhuman utterings of the Great Ones into what we now know as Carol runes. In what I see as a truly Lovecraftian fashion, it's highly probable that comprehending the speech of the Great Ones is impossible for humans. Yet, Carol seemingly had a unique talent for creating visual representations of their words. A hunter who possesses the proper workshop tool can etch these Carol runes into their mind, thereby attaining their wondrous strength. I firmly believe that Provost Willem would have been proud of Carol's runes because they do not rely on blood in any capacity. This statement is quite telling to me, as it suggests 3 things. First, that Provost Willem and Carol were close, for Willem's pride to be a metric of success. Second, it implies Willem never had the chance to be proud, which makes me think the two may have lost contact. And third, and what I find most crucial, is that Willem's pride was contingent on the runes not relying on blood. In my interpretation, this clearly means Willem did not approve of using the old blood found in the Tome of the Gods. The Metamorphosis rune, for instance, states, the discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. Metamorphosis and the excesses and deviation that followed was only the beginning. This tells me that Willem foresaw the danger. He believed in a different path, one of attaining more insight, for in his view, humanity's eyes had yet to open. My conviction on this point is bolstered by the Eyes rune, which states, Master Willem looked to beings from higher planes for guidance, and sought to line his brain with eyes in order to elevate his thoughts. These descriptions, to me, paint a clear picture of the sheer scale of ambition these characters possessed. With the discovery of beings greater than themselves came a powerful desire to ascend to godhood, to push humanity into its next evolutionary stage. The only question, as I see it, was how to achieve this through blood or through insight. This fundamental disagreement, I believe, is what split the ranks of the Byrgenwerth scholars. This brings me to the critical cutscene where Master Willem and Laurence parted ways. Laurence says,
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
From this exchange, I infer that Laurence was a high-ranking student of Willem's. Laurence addresses him as master, and Willem clearly holds him in high enough regard to view his departure as a betrayal. Laurence disagrees, stating, No, but you will never listen. He does not see it as a betrayal, and here, I believe, we arrive at the very core of their disagreement. Essentially, I see their conflict boiling down to the difference between the game's two primary resources. Willem believed that mankind needed insight and knowledge to ascend, whereas Laurence put his faith in the power of blood. Laurence tries to reassure Willem, telling him, I tell you, I will not forget our adage, implying he will always fear the old blood, but will not let that fear stop him from using it. Willem's response is, in my opinion, one of the most iconic lines. We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. They both utter the final words, fear the old blood, before Laurence says, I must take my leave. From my perspective, Laurence then leaves the Byrgenwerth scholars, taking a small group of rebels with him, and goes on to found the Healing Church. Willem, in contrast, remains at Byrgenwerth, dedicated to his quest to elevate his thoughts to a higher plane. I imagine Willem sitting there in his rocking chair, overlooking the lake, pondering how to acquire more insight while Laurence went on to build his empire. It is my firm belief that everything Laurence would come to achieve was built upon the knowledge he gained at Byrgenwerth. In retrospect, it becomes crystal clear to me why Willem saw Laurence's departure as such a profound betrayal. It's even possible, I think, that Willem himself planted these very ideas in Laurence's mind. A note in the lecture hall supports this view. Master Willem was right. Evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race. I believe Laurence possessed courage, but it was a courage that bordered on arrogance. The description of the Byrgenwerth student uniform says to me that the Healing Church has its roots in Byrgenwerth, and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. The focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension would surely bring Master Willem to despair if only he knew. So, in my view, Laurence threw caution to the wind and placed all his faith in the old blood. Just think about human history for a moment. Imagine if, at any point, a church was founded that possessed a substance capable of curing any disease. Imagine the power that church and its city would wield if it distributed this cure freely. I believe this is precisely what transpired in Yharnam. People flocked from all over to be treated with the miraculous blood of the gods, and the citizens of Yharnam, in turn, placed their unshakable faith in the Healing Church. To me, what happened in Yharnam is eerily similar to what occurred in the tombs deep below, where the blood was first discovered. As we know, many chalice dungeons, particularly those in Lorraine, are now overrun with horrific beasts. The lower Lorraine chalice description tells a chilling story. There are trace remains of medical procedures in parts of ailing Lorraine. Whether these were attempts to control the scourge of the beast, or the cause of the outbreak, is unknown. Furthermore, the ailing Lorraine chalice states, "The tragedy that struck this ailing land of Lorraine is said to have its root in the scourge of the beast. Some have made the dreaded extrapolation that Yharnam may be next. Through the rampant overuse of the healing blood, the city was doomed to succumb to the scourge of the beast. Until that inevitable day, however, I see Laurence and the healing church growing in power, all thanks to the miraculous, yet tainted, properties of their special blood. Yharnam, as a result, transformed into a city defined by both worship and fear. As I explore the city, I see the influence of the church absolutely everywhere. With Yharnam's vast resources, it seems clear to me that Laurence had the power to expand the church far beyond what would have ever been possible at Byrgenwerth. All the while, I believe he continued the exploration of the labyrinth beneath Yharnam. The tomb prospector set supports my view. Attire of the tomb prospectors who explore the old labyrinth on behalf of the healing church. The healing church traces its roots to Byrgenwerth, and is therefore aware of the ruins' true importance. These ruins contain much more than hunter trinkets. Indeed, they hide the very secrets of the old Great Ones sought after by those with the insight to imagine greatness. On top of this, I see that Laurence split the church into multiple branches, each with a distinct purpose: the choir, the school of Mensis, and the workshop. I'll delve into these branches as they become relevant, but it's my belief that the church's primary purpose, at least in the eyes of the Yharnamites, was the administration of blood healing. A note in the Grand Cathedral seems to confirm this for me. Heir to the ritual of blood, purveyor of ministration, place your hand upon the altar's sacred covering and inscribe Master Laurence's adage upon your flesh. The blood ministers, I think, were the ones who administered this healing. How else could the people of Yharnam have become so obsessed with blood? It's said they produced more blood than alcohol in Yharnam, as the former was considered more intoxicating. However, I'm convinced the ministration of blood was merely a means to an end. The healing church, I believe, still intended to commune with the Great Ones, hoping to ascend humanity to a higher plane. This sacred task, in my opinion, was given to the choir. Members of the choir, as I see them, were both the highest-ranking clerics of the healing church and scholars who continued the work that began at Byrgenwerth. The eye covering they wear indicates to me their debt to Master Willem's teachings, even though their paths ultimately diverged. The choir, dressed in black and white with that familiar eye covering, occupied the upper cathedral ward. It seems to me their job was to research and attempt to make contact with the Great Ones. I believe the Great Easy Chalice became the cornerstone of the choir, this elite delegation of the church. It was also the first great chalice brought to the surface since the time of Byrgenwerth, and I am convinced it allowed the choir to have an audience with Ebrietas. Ebrietas, as I've mentioned, was the left-behind Great One who came to reside beneath the Grand Cathedral. We are told that the Grand Cathedral is the birthplace of the healing church's special blood. And if the church was indeed using the blood of the Great Ones, then who's to say it wasn't Ebrietas' blood they were using? One of the secret rites of the choir, the augur of Ebrietas, was used by high-ranking members of the healing church, which to me is telling. The description reads, "Use phantasms, the invertebrates known to be augurs of the Great Ones, to partially summon abandoned Ebrietas." I see this as one of the few rites that allow a direct use of a Great One's power and clear evidence that the choir had approached the Eldritch truth. Interestingly, this arcane fighting method, the augur of Ebrietas, was also shared with the second subsection of the healing church, the school of Mensis. In my understanding, the upper echelons of the healing church were formed by the school of Mensis. which was based in the Unseen Village. This brings me to the next important character in my narrative, Mikolash, who I believe was the head of the School of Mensis. The School of Mensis was, as its name implies, a place of learning, research, and experimentation for the Healing Church. Their student uniform description notes, "The Healing Church has its roots in Byrgenwerth and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design." The school itself was located beneath Yharnam in a place called Yharnam, the Unseen Village. This location suggests to me that the work of Mensis was intended to be kept secret from the people of Yharnam. In fact, as time went on, it seems to me the school began working increasingly alone, perhaps even separately from the Healing Church itself. The Yharnam attire tells me that the hunters of Yharnam answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers blend into the night wearing this attire. These were not, in my opinion, true hunters. That title, I believe, was reserved for the third subsection of the Healing Church, the Hunters of the Workshop. These capable church warriors, I think, appeared as the Scourge of the Beast began to manifest in Yharnam. The Workshop Hunters, as I understand it, served under Gehrman, the first hunter, a figure familiar to us all. The Hunter Attire description reads, "One of the standard articles of hunter attire, fashioned at the workshop. A fine piece of hunter attire that provides stable defense to anyone facing Yharnam's beastly threat. Allows one to stalk beasts unannounced by cover of night." I believe the unannounced. Part of that sentence could refer to killing beasts stealthily, but it might also be because the workshop itself was a secret institution. The original workshop is located in a very hard-to-find area of Cathedral Ward, and it makes sense to me you wouldn't want the general populace to know that the miracle blood was turning them into beasts. When that kind of information is floating around, avoiding panic at all costs is paramount. So, in my view, the hunters hunted beasts under the cover of night. But I believe the hunters and the beastly scourge couldn't remain a secret forever. In the area that would come to be known as Old Yharnam, a new disease appeared called ashen blood. I call it a disease, but the medicinal tablets used for treatment actually counteract poison. An antidote tablet is described as being used to treat ashen blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged Old Yharnam long ago. These tablets, however, only offered short-term relief. It is my understanding that the ashen blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. Think about what that implies to me. We know the old blood heals every illness. We know the old blood causes the beastly scourge, and now we know the ashen blood caused the beastly scourge to spread. In short, it seems to me that people were infected with this ashen blood, and the medicine they had only provided temporary relief, forcing them to turn to the old blood instead. I even think it's possible that the Healing Church used this ashen blood to gain more power, swooping in with their miracle cure and liberating the people from the ashen blood disease. Since ashen blood appears to be poisonous, perhaps the church even poisoned the populace themselves just to create an excuse to administer the old blood. That excuse, that reason for the populace to believe in you, would have been incredibly powerful. Whatever the case, I know for a fact that the beastly scourge was triggered overwhelmingly in Old Yharnam, so much so that they ultimately had to burn the entire district down and cordon it off from the rest of the city. A note captures this despair. The red moon hangs low, and beasts rule the streets. Are we left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? With this event, the hunt became known to everyone. I suspect the church feared an uprising from the people of Yharnam, because a note in central Yharnam reads, "When the hunt began, the Healing Church left us, blocking the Great Bridge to Cathedral Ward, as Old Yharnam burned to the ground that moonlit night. As a result of this, I believe Gehrman's workshop was sealed and closed. With the scourge of the beast now public knowledge, perhaps there was no longer a need for secrecy. The Saw Hunter badge now reads, badge crafted long ago at the workshop, attests to one's prowess as a hunter of beasts. The workshop is gone, and no group recognizes this meaningless badge. At this point, it seems to me the church retreated. They blocked themselves off in the upper cathedral ward and devised a new strategy for dealing with the scourge of beasts that was now spreading throughout all of Yharnam. Eventually, I believe the original workshop hunters disbanded, and in their place, the church founded the Church Hunter Workshop. Ludwig, I understand, was the chief hunter of this new healing church force, which consisted of hunters dressed in black and white. The Black Church Hunter attire description tells me that most healing church hunters are elementary doctors who understand the importance of early prevention of the scourge, achieved by disposing of victims, even potential victims, before signs of sickness manifest themselves. Their black attire is synonymous with fear and that peculiar Yharnam madness. To me, the job of the Black Church Hunters was brutally clear: eliminate any sign of the scourge, even if it had not yet manifested. The fear this inspired in the citizens is evident, as most people in upper cathedral wards seem to be deathly afraid of the church. The White Church Hunters, in my view, had a different role. These doctors were superiors to the black-clad, preventative hunters and were specialists in experimentally backed blood ministration and the scourge of the beast. I believe they held the conviction that medicine was not a means of treatment, but rather a method of research, and that some knowledge could only be gained by exposing oneself to sickness. Their experimentation might explain the monstrously large church giants, who I imagine would have been particularly useful in fighting the beasts. Ludwig's great sword, to my eye, exhibits several departures from the original workshop's design, which suggests to me that the church was anticipating much larger, more inhuman beasts. On top of this, it appears Ludwig took a much more overt approach to beast hunting. Nightly, he would lead excursions from the Great Bridge into central Yharnam to fight back the tide of beasts. But he was not alone in this fight. The population of central Yharnam joined the hunt as well, swelling the hunters' ranks. A description reads, Ludwig, the first hunter of the healing church, once recruited Yharnamites to serve as hunters. This hunter's attire was made for these new recruits and provided excellent straightforward defense, but not nearly enough to allow an ordinary man to stand any real chance against the beasts. This seems like a very clever move to me, as it likely prevented the populace from blaming the church and instead fostered an us versus them mentality against the beasts. Meanwhile, back at Byrgenwerth, I believe Master Willem had an epiphany. We are thinking on the basest of planes. What we need are more eyes. And in my view, Willem took this quite literally. The students who remained at Byrgenwerth appear to have been transformed into multi-eyed, fly-like creatures. More importantly, Willem himself found an umbilical cord of a Great One, which I see as a profoundly significant and powerful artifact. An item description confirms my belief. Provost Willem sought the cord in order to elevate his being and thoughts to those of a Great One by lining his brain with eyes. The only choice, he knew, if man were ever to match their greatness. This cord was used to gain insight and, as they say, eyes on the inside, though its true meaning is lost to memory. It's difficult to know precisely how Willem created or came across this umbilical cord, but for now I know he had one. When we encounter Willem, he directs us to the Great Lake. The power of large bodies of water is referenced in a few runes, which supports my interpretation. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep, and an augur of the Eldritch truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours. The lake and what it hides holds the truth, in my opinion. Rom, the Byrgenwerth spider, lies within it, and while there is much we don't know about her, I will tell you what I do. One note says, the Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us, a terrible shame. Another states, the spider is certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared. I believe this is what the vacuous part of Rom's name refers to. This creature is somehow concealing the true nature of the world, and when you defeat it, you no longer need insight to see the world for what it truly is. The night advances, the blood moon descends, and after killing Rom, we are finally granted access to what remains of Yharnam, the home of Mikolash and his school of Mensis. It seems to me that the school of Mensis had grown apart from the healing church and the choir. There is little information on Mikolash and his school, but I believe I can prove there was a split. Firstly, Mikolash uses the Augur of Ebrietas, a secret rite of the choir shared among high-ranking members of the healing church. This suggests to me that he was once trusted with this information and was a sane member of the church. To prove my belief that a split occurred, I point to the clear signs of distrust and fighting between the groups. Inside Yharnam, we find the imprisoned corpse of a choir member, and within the Nightmare of Mensis, we find a figure the official guide calls Edgar, Choir Intelligence. Clearly, in my opinion, the choir was suspicious of what was happening in Yharnam, and based on what we find there, it seems they had every reason to be. I am convinced the school of Mensis was attempting to commune with the Great Ones, and they succeeded. Just as Willem did, they found an umbilical cord. We can find 4 such cords in the game that allow contact with the Great Ones, and Mikolash possessed one of them. This cord, I believe, granted Mensis an audience with Murgo, but it resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. As I understand it, most Great Ones reside in the Nightmare Realm, and whatever ritual they performed with this cord ripped Mensis and its students into a nightmare. This, to me, is why you find the lecture hall within the nightmare and why there are hundreds of dead students throughout Yharnam, all wearing the cage that seemingly delivered them to their harrowing fate. Mikolash's own corpse provides the gateway into this nightmare, and we find him there, clearly insane, wandering its halls. Mikolash seems to believe that it's possible to ascend and become a Great One, citing Rom as his example. However, I think Rom is not fully developed. Rather, she simply has the blood of their kin. Let's return to Rom for a moment. When you defeat her, Queen Yharnam appears. I see her as a Thumerian woman who clearly suffered a horrific childbirth. She is intrinsically linked to the Nightmare of Mensis and the ritual that Rom was hiding. She appears in this nightmare, looking up toward Murgo's loft, where Murgo and its wet nurse reside. Queen Yharnam, as I know, hails from the ancient Thumerian civilization and was blessed with a child of a Great One. The way she appears outside Murgo's loft makes it clear to me that her consciousness, her spirit, was pulled into this nightmare as well. Even when you encounter her physical self in the Thumerian tombs, the baby Murgo screams whenever you strike her. Even upon killing her in the tombs, it's clear to me she is not truly dead. Her horrific consciousness is merely asleep, stirring in unsettling motions. Her consciousness seems to be manifesting here in the nightmare, completely separate from her physical form, and I believe the same is happening to you, to Mikolash, and to the other Great Ones in the nightmare with you. You all exist within this nightmare that Mensis created. The next logical question in my mind is which Great One impregnated Yharnam with Murgo all those years ago. I believe it was the formless Udun. The description states, the Great One Udun, lacking form, exists only in voice. To present the quickest evidence for my belief, there is nothing in the cradle after you defeat Murgo's wet nurse, and Murgo itself, the child, has no form. Its cries are also heard throughout your entire adventure. It seems to exist everywhere. Additionally, Murgo's wet nurse appears to have no form beneath its robes, and I also think the women who are impregnated when the blood moon descends are all related to Udun. When you defeat Murgo's wet nurse, you receive a message unlike any other, nightmare slain, instead of prey slaughtered. This tells me you have defeated a true Great One that has elevated its consciousness to the nightmare realm, and the game is nearing its end. However, all of this should make you wonder, as it did me, the Nightmare of Mensis isn't the only dream world I've been in, is it? This entire time, I've actually been journeying out from the hunter's dream, guided by lanterns that led me to Murgo and its wet nurse, all made possible by Gehrman and his doll. I believe we must travel to the hunter's workshop in the waking world and seek the truth. A note there reads, Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Next to this cord is the unanimated doll. I believe taking a hairpin from this real doll and giving it to the doll in the dream is key. When you give her the hairpin, she sheds a single tear, which becomes a blood gem that continually restores HP, the life essence of a hunter. The description concludes, perhaps this doll's creator had wished for such a friend, albeit in vain, which solidifies my view. It seems clear to me that Gehrman called upon the Great Ones using an umbilical cord, much like Mikolash did. The Great Ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called upon. I believe that Gehrman, lonely and without purpose after the church no longer needed his workshop, must have called upon the Great Ones. In my interpretation, a Great One, the pale moon presence, responded and imprisoned Gehrman within the dream. This is supported, I feel, by the rare dialogue Gehrman utters in his sleep, which clearly shows he does not wish to be there. So, for what purpose was this dream conceived? The dole tells us that countless hunters have passed through this place, and the many graves serve as a testament to that fact. Eileen and Jura also have dialogue that, in my opinion, confirms this as they speak of having been through the dream before. So why, I ask, are hunters being sent through this dream, unable to die, forced to go out into the world and kill beasts? The answer becomes clearer to me when you kill Murgo's wet nurse. You return to find the hunter's workshop burning down, the dream's purpose seemingly fulfilled. Therefore, I conclude the purpose of your dream, and your hunt was to slay a great one. 3 endings are then presented. In the first, Gehrman offers a way out of the dream, asking you to accept your death. If you do, you awaken in the waking world of Yharnam, your consciousness no longer linked to the dream. The trophy for this ending reads, "You lived through the hunt and saw another day." The second option, as I see it, is to reject Gehrman's offer. He suggests this must be a decision born of madness, and pits his will against yours to forcibly remove you from the dream, all while entreating you to accept death and be freed. If you overpower him, we meet the moon presence, the being that I believe conceived this nightmare. It embraces you, and in the following cutscene, we see ourselves in Gehrman's role, hosting the dream, likely as a slave or surrogate child to the moon presence, guiding future hunters to slay other great ones. The trophy for this ending states, "Captivated by the moon presence, you pledge to watch over the hunter's dream." There's one key thing I believe you must remember. The Great Ones are a race, but a race unlike any other. Each Great One is entirely unique, and I don't think they necessarily work together. In fact, the very existence of the dream inclines me to believe that the moon presence is hostile towards other Great Ones. In the third and final ending, you consume 3 umbilical cords and resist the will of the moon presence. You overpower it, and in the cutscene that follows, the doll coddles the new being you have become. You have, in my opinion, truly ascended as few have before. The trophy description says it all. You became an infant Great One, lifting humanity into its next childhood. And so, we are left adrift in the cosmic ocean, clutching at questions that shimmer like faint stars in an oppressive, endless night. What, I still ask myself, is the pale blood whispered of in trembling notes? Why does the moon presence, a god in its own right, shepherd hunters toward the slaughter of its own kind? And which of these fates is the good one, to awaken from the nightmare, to become its new keeper, or to be reborn into something wholly other, an infant god taking its first squirming breaths in a new age for mankind? I believe these are not questions meant to be answered, but to be endured. They are the echoes of the hunt, the final, chilling resonance of a story that does not truly end, but merely returns to the blood-drenched soil from which it sprouted, waiting for the next eyes to open and fear what they see. With the main tale of Bloodborne behind us, our journey is far from over. Beyond the streets of Yharnam and the nightmare realms we've endured lies another enigma. the Astral Clocktower. A place suspended between beauty and dread, its ticking heart hides secrets as profound as any we've uncovered so far. In this next chapter, we'll peel back the layers of its history, its keeper, and its place in the greater web of Bloodborne's lore. I often think about the sheer, horrifying randomness of survival in this nightmare. After that bloody, brutal symphony of violence against Ludwig, my mind keeps returning to a single, silent note. The corpse that crawled towards us in the beginning. It seems almost a cosmic joke to me that on a subsequent attempt, this fragile form, this bit player in a grand tragedy, somehow survived the apocalyptic stomping of a great one. I can almost hear his incredulous, silent laughter, a man spared by a dice roll of the gods, a testament to how utterly meaningless both life and death can be in this place. On my other character, he is dead, a permanent fixture of my ongoing attempts against Ludwig. I suppose you only get one chance to witness such a bizarre miracle. While I get lost in these pointless little details, I'm always amazed by what you all manage to find. It turns out that if you speak to Ludwig's severed head after the fight while wearing the garb of his own healing church, he has unique dialogue. He says, "To know I did not suffer such denigration for nothing. Thank you kindly. Now I may sleep in peace." I just didn't have the heart to tell him that his beloved church hunters are now nothing more than blood-crazed lunatics. I feel compelled to find out what happens if you tell him his life's work was for nothing. I imagine it would be profoundly sad, perfect material for a story of its own. But as it turns out, there is still one sane and human blade of the healing church left in the nightmare. He's found reciting a chant, one that I believe the healing church hunters must have learned to keep the madness at bay while on the hunt. The sheer repetition would have been a lifeline for anyone's sanity, and in my experience, he's not the only one who relies on such a mantra. In fact, the next two characters we encounter have their own little chants going as well. We'll be hearing that bell soon enough, and I can tell you from experience, it is not a sound you want to hear. At the corridor's end, we find the Fist of Gratia, a weapon I understand belonged to a hulking brute of a woman who lacked the finesse to handle firearms. And just ahead, we run into someone horribly familiar. To me, this is almost certainly Vicar Amelia. The chant is the exact same one we hear before her boss fight. The voice is identical, and she wears the same white garb, albeit less raggedy, which I think is a clear sign that this is all based in the past. It's my understanding that blood-crazed hunters often ended up in the nightmare, so she must have found her way here after we put her to rest in the waking world. This makes perfect sense, as you have to kill Amelia to even get into the DLC. The eye pendant we found earlier confirms that this is the Cathedral of the Healing Church, which houses their private research hall. From what I've gathered of the lore so far, it's clear the church and its choir have long experimented on patients to gain insight and perhaps even ascend to the status of great ones. This research hall, I hope, can tell us a bit more about, wait, is this Eileen? I had to listen closely, but the way she says puddle sounds exactly like how she says hunter. The accent is undeniably the same, and I think the voice is too. Beyond that, I suppose we'd need more concrete proof. Regardless, the gameplay in this area is, in my opinion, quite interesting. For me, it was the closest the series has ever come to a stealth-based level, though I don't know if everyone else had that same experience. The reason for this is the sheer number of blue elixirs you find scattered about. This was a medicine used by the high ministers of the healing church to numb the brains of their test subjects, and their presence here feels chillingly appropriate, given that this research hall is teeming with patients with grotesquely enlarged heads. It seems to me our character is able to retain consciousness after drinking this elixir through sheer force of will, allowing us to use its secondary effect, a kind of semi-stealth. I'll admit I couldn't always be bothered to kill every single patient, so I often used a blue elixir to scout out the level, which led to some genuinely cool moments. Watching one of them run right past me was a thrill. I've always felt the Souls games are rare examples of games that truly reward you for being observant. Some bookcases, for example, have pressure plates in front of them that, when stepped on, trigger the bookcases themselves to attack you. For another example, the huge, winding stairway, you'll notice some platforms are inaccessible, which to me is a clear hint that the staircase will rotate later on, rewarding you for coming back to explore again. And being observant here really pays off, because the item you need is the locked shield. It's a shield with such low requirements that I believe pretty much any build can use it. Its real value is its protection against non-physical damage, which I can tell you will be incredibly useful in the next boss fight. Moving on, the main lore question for me in this area is, what was the church actually trying to achieve with these patients? You find brain fluid on the fully developed heads, the ones that talk about the sounds they're hearing. The item description for the brain fluid reads, extracted from a patient whose head expanded until that was all that they were. These heads and their patients seem to me to be exactly the kind of insight-based experiments I would expect from the church. What they're saying clearly has some significance. They all talk about water, and I don't believe these are just the ramblings of insane people. The importance of large bodies of water is a theme I've seen referenced in a lot of runes. The lake runes, for instance, state that they serve as a bulwark guarding sleep and are an augur of the Eldritch truth. Other texts say that the transcription of the Great Ones in human voices ripples like a watery reflection, and that we must overcome the hindrance of water to seek what is ours. We will learn more about what this means later, but for now, I am certain that these beings possess a higher level of insight. It's a very specific detail that these enlarged heads are the ones that can hear the water, and soon, so will we. One patient, who hasn't completely transformed into a large head, speaks of being a failure, as if she has let down Lady Maria, whom all the patients clearly view as some kind of caring, motherly figure. One character, Saint Adeline, is particularly talkative. We help her by giving her 3 helpings of brain fluid, and afterward, she seems so proud to have finally become something, to have fulfilled her purpose. If you complete her quest, she gives you the milkweed rune, which turns us into this celestial thing. She also gives us the balcony key, which leads to the area that held the celestial emissaries in the waking world. To me, this is more proof that these patients were part of an attempt to create kin, or these celestial emissaries. The milkweed rune's description says it's a translation of the inhumane, sticky whispers that reveal the nature of a celestial attendant, which sounds a lot like a celestial emissary to me. Speaking of failures, the next boss is literally called the Living Failures. In my interpretation, these beings, and by extension the other creatures in the research hall, all seem to be attempts at creating celestials in some form, maybe even celestial emissaries who could communicate with the Great Ones. There are a lot of similarities, especially in the location where you fight them. After this fight, we speak to the wandering hunter, who I'm going to call Simon for reasons I'll explain later. He gives us a clear directive: climb the Astral Clocktower and kill Maria. So far, all we know for sure is that she's the caretaker of the patients in this clinic, and that she is guarding some true secret. I am confident in saying that this was my favorite fight in Bloodborne so far. I absolutely love the hunter boss fights in this game because I feel they put you on what seems like even footing with an opponent. It allows you to make good use of the health regain mechanic, unlike most beast enemies that just flatten you in 1 or 2 hits. I love when it's a fight where you can actively regain your health. You can probably parry her, but I wasn't going to find out. I feel like spamming the parry is a really cheap way to experience this fight. I wanted to dash around, rely on my reflexes with my Blades of Mercy, and get through all of her phases that way. And as we're discovering, every boss in the old Hunters has phases, and Maria is no different. She has 3. Every time I fought her, I managed to get 1 stage further. I did this because, in my opinion, her phases are exceptionally well designed. It's not like fighting Ludwig, where at 50% health, you're suddenly fighting a completely different boss. No, Maria trains you. Each phase simply upgrades the attacks she's already been using, which means the earlier phases are actually preparing you for the later ones. And the fight rewards you for learning her moveset. It's such a good fight, and I'll tell you now, Maria's story is going to be a fantastic and tragic tale to tell. There is so much interesting stuff to talk about, but we'll have to save most of it for another time. Let's just touch on a little of it. Her armor set says she was an apprentice to Gehrman, though he harbored an affection for her that she apparently never sensed. Since Gehrman created the Hunter's Dream, it's clear to me that the doll is modeled directly after Maria. This caretaker in the dream shares most of Maria's physical attributes. Maria is a caretaker of the patients, and the doll is a caretaker for us hunters. There are so many similarities there beyond just appearance. However, Gehrman certainly seems displeased with the doll in the dream. For a man who supposedly created this doll out of love for another woman, he never interacts with her. And here, I believe, we arrive at the story's aching heart. Gehrman, in his lonely godhood, modeled the Hunter's Dream, and in it, he placed a doll crafted in the perfect image of Maria. I see the doll as a beautiful, hollow vessel, a caretaker for us, just as Maria was a caretaker for her patients. Perhaps the reason for his disdain is because the doll has a completely different personality, far less headstrong and much more subservient than the real Maria. For all his power, Gehrman's creation is a flawed echo. I feel he couldn't replicate who Maria truly was in his dream. It is the ultimate tragedy, in my eyes, to build a monument to a love you can never truly reclaim, a perfect copy with no soul. But there is much more to say. And that is the story of Astral Clockwork. Now that we are done with the tragic story of the Astral Clocktower, let us dive into another such story, filled with intrigue and curiosity, the story of Vileblood Hunter, Alfred. I believe that all history is a story of descent. First, as I understand it, came the age of the Great Ones. These were mysterious, powerful beings, and I imagine each one was completely unique from the last. Then came the age of the Pthumerians. It's my belief the Great Ones once lived alongside the Pthumerians, but eventually ascended to a higher realm, leaving the Pthumerians behind in their silent tombs. Finally came the age of man, and with us, a fatal curiosity. A group of our kind discovered the tombs of the Great Ones and the Pthumerians who now guarded them. These explorers were the Byrgenwerth scholars, a group I see as being devoted to seeking truths that were perhaps better left unknown. They burrowed deep into this ancient world that they didn't understand, uncovering relics, rituals, and a race that had not been disturbed for a very long time. Most importantly, though, they stumbled upon a substance they called the Old Blood. This blood was, by all accounts, incredibly powerful. A transfusion with it could cure any illness. But this discovery, I believe, was a poison pill that split the ranks of the Byrgenwerth scholars, for they could not agree on how it was to be used. The head of the scholars, a man named Willem, believed that humanity would be undone by the blood. Our eyes have yet to open, he said, and so we should fear it. But other scholars disagreed, probably thinking him cowardly. One man, Laurence, strikes me as much more headstrong than his mentor. He disagreed with Willem, abandoned him, and went on to found the Healing Church, a society built entirely upon the use of the Old Blood. But my readings tell me there was a third man who betrayed the Byrgenwerth scholars. He stole what the scholars considered forbidden blood and took it far away to the nobles of Cainhurst Castle. A hunter named Alfred tells me this story himself. Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Byrgenwerth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Cainhurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vilebloods was born. Alfred sees the Vilebloods as fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the church's blood healing. The ruler of the Vilebloods is still alive today, he told me, and so, to honor my master's wishes, I search for the path to Cainhurst Castle. From what I can piece together, the people of Cainhurst were proud and noble, with a society made up of 3 tiers. At the bottom were the servants and the knights. Above them were the nobles, who I picture as indulgent and arrogant. And above them all was one, the queen. It was this queen who received the forbidden blood stolen from Byrgenwerth and became what Alfred calls a Vileblood. From this point, I see Cainhurst beginning to parallel Yharnam in many ways. For example, Beasts appear, which are then dealt with by the knights of Cainhurst. The queen gives employ to hunters who hunt not beasts, but other hunters. These are her blood hunters, who seek blood dregs to feed their beloved queen, so that she may one day bear a child of blood. The Vilebloods thus become the sworn enemies of the church. As far as I know, Yharnam and Cainhurst are the only two places with two different strains of the old blood. It feels only natural that they would become rivals. So, the church forms a group called the Executioners, headed by a man known as Master Logarius. The Executioners, as I see them, were zealots. They existed for the sole purpose of destroying impurity wherever it was found. Through multiple generations, they searched for the Vilebloods of Cainhurst Castle. Eventually, they found them and departed in force to exact their vengeance. Alfred speaks of this with a mix of reverence and sorrow. In his time, Master Logarius led his executioners into Cainhurst Castle to cleanse it of the Vilebloods. But all did not go well, and Master Logarius became a blessed anchor, guarding us from evil, tragic times, that Master Logarius should be abandoned in the accursed domain of the Vilebloods. I must free him, so that he may be properly honored in martyrdom. The problem is, Alfred does not know how to get to Cainhurst. Yet, in Losafka's clinic, the very clinic where I first awoke, I find a curious invitation in a back room. It's an old blood-stained summons, inviting an honored guest to the forsaken castle Cainhurst. Rather bafflingly, it is addressed to me. I have to wonder if this is why I even came to Yharnam in the first place. The invitation is direct. Do not hesitate. The stagecoach leaves from Hemwick Crossing. While I'm in Cainhurst, I feel I must attempt to clarify where good and evil truly lie. Logarius, the leader of the executioners, once said, acts of goodness are not always wise and acts of evil are not always foolish, but regardless, we shall always strive to be good. But who is Logarius to label good and evil? I believe the world is not black and white, yet his judgment led to the slaughter of the people of Cainhurst. So, did these people deserve to be slaughtered? When I arrive, the first thing I notice is that the beasts here are different. Very few are wolf-like those in Yharnam. In fact, they appear to have evolved according to their cold environment. Bloodlickers roam, bloating themselves on the corpses of the fallen that lie beneath the snow, and gargoyles imitate the architecture, patiently waiting for their prey. In the halls of Cainhurst, I find the ghosts of nobles roaming, undying and ethereal. Upon the tallest tower of Cainhurst, I find Logarius all alone. It seems Logarius and his executioners slaughtered every Vileblood noble until only one remained, the queen. To his despair, Logarius discovered that the queen was immortal. She could be rendered, crushed, and broken, but there was always the threat that her flesh would reform. So, he took the only option available to him. He donned the old king's crown, a powerful heirloom of Cainhurst. This allowed him to hide Cainhurst Castle and the queen away from the world, so that no one would ever stumble upon the last Vileblood. When we reach the castles, she speaks to us, saying,
Visitor, I claim no subjects, but here lieth our throne. Kneel afore us, or get thee gone. Kneel. Visitor, moon-scented hunter. I am Annalise, Queen of Castle Cainhurst. Ruler of the Vilebloods, and sworn enemy of the Church. Yet our people are murdered, and we are prisoner to this wretched mask. What is it thou art in search of?
It appears that if you were invited to Cainhurst, you will always be able to find it. This seems to be the key that Alfred was missing. He exclaims,
Is that the sigil of Cainhurst? I've heard tell of Cainhurst nobles and their amusingly pompous invitations. Wonderful. I thank you profusely. I feel my master's hand at work. Praise the good blood, and let us cleanse these tarnished streets.
The Order of the Executioners, I've learned, believe in martyrdom. That is, they believe in suffering or dying for a holy cause. Martyr. Logarius suffers here on his frozen throne to keep the world safe from what he perceived as evil. But in my opinion, it cannot be considered absolute martyrdom, for the queen remains alive. As does Logarius. I get the sense that Alfred deeply desires to kill this woman and perhaps even his master as well. These deaths, I believe, would allow his idol to pass into legend as a true martyr who died for the greater good. When he finally confronts her, his words are a testament to his madness.
Master, look! I've done it! I've done it! I smashed and pounded and grounded this rotten siren into fleshy pink pulp. There, you filthy monstrosity! What good's your immortality now? Try stirring up trouble in this sorry state. All mangled and twisted, with every inside on the outside for all the world to see. Oh, you, is it? Look at this. Thanks to you, I've done it. Well, isn't it wonderful? Now Master can be canonized as a true martyr.
Ironically, Alfred coming here and killing the queen would have run completely counter to Logarius's wishes. The queen is undying, so without a guardian, there's always the risk that she could rise again. That is why Logarius stood guard here for all these years. Yet, of course, as Logarius himself said, acts of goodness are not always wise, and so Alfred kills himself so that he can become a martyr along with his beloved master. And as Alfred lies dead, I take the flesh of the queen and resurrect her in a world now devoid of executioners so that the Vilebloods may rise again. In this final, quiet act of defiance, I feel the wheel of history turn once more, set in motion by my own hand. Her words welcome me into this new reality.
An odd hunter thou art indeed. We've tired of these piteous nights. Share in our plight, and take oath against the church. Drink deep of our blood. Feel the spreading corruption burn. Now, thou art too a Vileblood. We two, the very last on this earth. We await thy return for the honor of Cainhurst.
I've always believed that when the sickness crept into Yharnam, it wasn't just the beasts we should have feared, but the so-called cure they concocted. The hunt, I see it not as a noble effort, but as a citywide fever dream breaking into a violent sweat. With the desperate clang of iron and the purifying hiss of fire, the populace rallied to purify their home, a notion I find tragically naive. They fought side by side with the hunters, who I've always seen as little more than talented butchers, equipped not to save, but to excise the spreading disease. You would think, looking from the outside, that together they might have stood a chance. Yet, what I see when we arrive in Yharnam is a city that has devoured itself whole. It's clear to me that while the hunt rages on, the people themselves have irrevocably changed. The line between who is a man and who is a beast has been, in my opinion, completely erased. I am convinced that it was the very bloodlust inspired by the hunt that acted as a catalyst, awakening the latent beast slumbering within every citizen. In a twist of cruel irony, the hunters, the city's supposed saviors, became the most hated and feared, for I believe they transform into the most horrific beasts of all. To prevent this very outcome, there has always been a grim necessity, a hunter of hunters. It takes a certain kind of resolve, I think, to hunt down former comrades who have finally succumbed to their inner demons and their thirst for blood. These hunters of hunters dress themselves as crows, a choice I interpret as a direct nod to the concept of a sky burial. It It said they hunt with the hope that their former compatriots might be returned to the skies and find rest in the hunter's dream, a sentiment I find both poetic and heartbreaking. Eileen, to my mind, is the very embodiment of this solemn duty. I would wager she was recruited back when the hunter's workshop was just finding its footing. She wields the blades of mercy, and what's fascinating to me is that they were forged with siderite, which I understand is a rare mineral fallen from the heavens. Her weapon and Gehrman's own burial blade are, as far as I know, the only two of their kind. I consider them to be true masterpieces, the very weapons that defined the entire arsenal crafted at the workshop. In time, it seems the hunter's workshop was deemed obsolete, but Gehrman's story was far from over. He went on to become the host of the hunter's dream, a spectral guide for hunters in the waking world. It's my understanding that Eileen, just like us and so many others, was a visitor to this dream as well. The mechanics of it are fascinating. When a hunter of the dream perishes in the waking world, their consciousness simply retreats back to the safety of the hunter's dream. From this nexus, it appears they can venture out to face the night again and again. With this dream sustaining her, I can only imagine that Eileen must have been an almost unstoppable force for a very long time. I've always believed everyone needs a purpose, a particular talent that defines them. Eileen's singular skill, in my opinion, was her incredible self-control, her ability to resist the intoxicating madness of the hunt, and to deal with those hunters who had fallen too far. When a hunter finally gave in to their bloodlust, it was Eileen who would swoop in like the crow she resembled and put them down before they could cause any more harm. I see her unique and lonely hunts as a service, protecting other hunters from the worst parts of themselves, a task she performed until her own age began to betray her. And she clearly pushed herself even beyond that, because the Eileen we meet is undeniably ancient. But then came the day she stopped dreaming. The doll herself speaks of the countless hunters who have visited the dream, whose graves now stand in their memory, a relic of a time that seems so long ago now. She bids us farewell, hoping we find our worth in the waking world, which I see as a profound statement on purpose. Eileen herself confirms this, stating,
"Oh, a hunter, are you? And an outsider? What a mess you've been caught up in. And tonight of all nights. Here, to welcome the new hunter. Prepare yourself for the worst. There are no humans left. They're all flesh-hungry beasts now."
I have to wonder though, did Gehrman, the dream's host, grant her this mercy willingly? Or was it because she had simply outlived her usefulness to him? I suspect we will never truly know the answer. Regardless, Eileen remains in Yharnam, determined to see her hunt through to the bitter end, her life's purpose still unfulfilled. When we meet her, she seems to see us for what we are, without the dream to catch her. Eileen's death is now permanent, a fact that I think lends her immense gravitas. And yet, there she stays in Yharnam, proud and utterly determined to hunt down every last hunter who poses a threat to the world. But I must stress, Eileen is one of the oldest characters we encounter, and it's my firm belief that without our help, she is doomed to perish in any assassination she now attempts. If we help her, her gratitude is understated but clear. To me, her pride is completely untouched by her age and predicament, and she continues to throw herself directly into harm's way. In a later encounter, she admits her own fallibility. "I'm afraid I've made a bit of a blunder. I'm just going to have a short rest." She tries to reassure us, and perhaps herself, saying, "Don't worry, I've taken blood, enough to save an old woman, but that thing still lies in wait." Her resolve, however, remains absolute. Turn back, this is my score to settle. I believe Eileen's trail of bloody assassinations inevitably leads her to the most powerful hunter still in the waking world. He is known as the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, but to Eileen, I suspect he is a former comrade, perhaps even one of Gehrman's first apprentices. There are 3 things about him that I find particularly telling. First, he wears the same crowfeather gear as Eileen, which strongly suggests to me that he either is or was a hunter of hunters himself. Second, he has mastered the art of quickening, a high-speed dashing technique that I understand was particular to the very first hunters of the workshop. It's a fact that we learn this art from the remains of a hunter who was likely one of Gehrman's first students. Third, the Bloody Crow uses weapons and armor from Cainhurst, a distant land ruled by a queen who, I've heard, craves the blood of hunters. The fact that he drops the Blood Rapture rune, a rune that resonates with the queen's servants, only solidifies this connection for me. Whoever this crow is, he seems to have completely abandoned the purpose of hunting beasts. In that specific way, I don't think he and Eileen are so different. I would even argue that Eileen could easily have ended up in his position if we, the player, do not intervene in her journey. In fact, we see that she does. She can become just like the terrified townsfolk of Yharnam, who look at another hunter and see nothing but a monster. Her potential madness is plain to hear, but because we do aid her, she doesn't lose herself to that despair. Instead, we find her on the steps, bloodied and broken from her final fight, ready to pass her solemn duty on to a worthy successor.
Don't you ever listen to your elders. No matter. You did save my life. I don't seem to be apt for this life anymore. My glory days were long ago now. I know. Here. For you. This too is hunter's work. But it bears no honour. A burden you may choose to carry. The decision is yours alone. Oh. My eyes grow heavy. Let me rest a while.
In her next words, I hear the weight of her entire existence. I don't seem to be up for this life anymore. My glory days were long ago now. I feel that after witnessing all of this, you absolutely should be questioning the very nature of the hunt. Many other characters certainly do. Its stated purpose is, of course, to hunt beasts. But what I've seen is that the hunt itself was the very thing that further awakened the beasthood within humanity. The hunt, in my view, is what unleashed the blood-crazed hunters upon the world, men and women who, on their own, are capable of inflicting far more damage than any mere animal ever could. And so I ask, when the night is over and you stand on the blood-slicked cobblestones of Yharnam, a canvas you've painted with the viscera of its men and women turned beast, for whom did your axe truly fall? I cannot help but wonder if the mercy that Gehrman shows to those who exit his dream is a genuine kindness, or if it is simply the cosmic equivalent of a janitor sweeping away those of us who have stared too long into the abyss and seen the terrible truth staring back. In the end, we are all just specks of dust in a forgotten nightmare. For I have learned a difficult truth once you finally, truly awaken. The dream itself becomes a phantom limb, a chilling echo you can feel but never, ever grasp. With the main path behind us, it's time to step into Yharnam's blood-soaked tradition, the beast hunt. The bells are ringing, the torches are lit, and the streets are already slick with fear. In this chapter, we step into the frenzy, following the hunters, the lore of the scourge, and the rituals that turned mercy into massacre. We'll map the rules of the hunt, the lies that sustain it, and the price every hunter pays when man and beast finally blur. To me, that cryptic whisper, "Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt," is more than a mere objective. It's the siren song at the beginning of a nightmare. I've walked these shadowed paths before in other lands, where the stated goal, such as slay the archdemons, ring the bell of awakening, or seek the king, was always a beautiful lie. I've learned that these initial commands are never the true end. They don't hold the answers I'm truly looking for, but I've come to believe they are designed to set us on the right path. It has always been on the journey toward these false summits that the real truths are unearthed. I see that Bloodborne is no different, so I accept the charge. I will seek this pale blood. When I first started asking around, the response was always a dismissive. Vileblood, you say? Never heard of it, but I was given a crucial piece of advice. If it's blood you're interested in, you should try the Healing Church. It seems to me that the church is the dark heart of this city, controlling all knowledge of blood ministration and every conceivable variety of blood. This so-called blood ministration, as I understand it, is the art of using blood for healing. I believe that in a time before my arrival, the Healing Church amassed immense power precisely because of the miraculous healing qualities of their special blood. They must have created or stumbled upon a blend so potent it could cure any illness, a discovery that would inevitably make them as powerful as gods. And just as you would expect, my reading of the situation is that travelers from far and wide journeyed to Yharnam, desperate for this cure. I think of Gilbert, one of these poor souls who mentions that what ailed him was incurable, but that the special blood at least bought him some precious time. It's my understanding that we, the player, are in the same boat. We were administered Yharnam blood in the opening moments of our journey, and many sources lead me to believe that we too carried an incurable disease. It's clear to me that blood became the city's object of worship and desire, and the church placed itself right at the center of it all. The pungent blood cocktail item description tells me everything I need to know about Yharnam's priorities. In Yharnam, they produced more blood than alcohol, as the former is more intoxicating. I imagine there was a golden era, a time when all was well, allowing the church to grow ever more powerful and for the reputation of Yharnam's blood to spread across the lands. But this grace period was horrifyingly brief, as it must have become sickeningly clear that the blood was tainted. The description for the antidote tells a grim story, confirming my suspicion that the healing blood itself gave rise to the endemic nightmare known as the Scourge of the Beast. I can only picture the terror as the men who had imbibed the blood began to turn, their arms lengthening, their hair growing, an insatiable bloodthirst twisting them into monsters. When I walk the streets of Yharnam now, I find that there are precious few humans left. Instead, coffins line the streets as if they were common furniture. It's a chilling sight that tells me death has become a mundane part of the daily routine here. In what I can only assume was a frantic panic, the church must have rallied a force to fight the beast outbreak they had caused. By inspecting the Yharnam hunter cap, I learn of a man named Ludwig, the very first hunter of the Healing Church. It appears Ludwig recruited the common men of Yharnam to serve as hunters alongside him. The hunter's attire I see everywhere was made for these new recruits, but I firmly believe it was nowhere near enough protection to allow ordinary men a real chance against the beasts they faced. And yet, Ludwig's influence is undeniable, seen in the ritualistic hunt carried out by the townsmen each and every night. With nothing more than steel and fire, the men of Yharnam fought the beasts. It's my understanding that ever since the tragedy that struck old Yharnam, fire has become a staple in the beast hunts, as it's thought to cleanse impurity. It also seems that certain types of beasts have an abnormal fear of flame. This explains why the Molotov cocktail is one of the oldest hunter tools found in the workshop. I'm haunted by one particular observation. Sometimes, when hunters burn beasts, they appear intoxicated by the euphoria of purification. It seems to me that despite all his efforts, Ludwig's attempts to rally the men of Yharnam backfired in the most tragic way imaginable. I believe those who engaged in the beast hunt became so overwhelmed with fear and bloodlust that their own transformation into beasts was ironically fast-forwarded. I see evidence of this everywhere as different men turn into different beasts, and most of the men on the streets of Yharnam are now half-turned, trapped in a patrol and a hunt that may never end. Meanwhile, the same Yharnamites who haven't yet turned hide indoors, and in my experience, they spurn any outsider stupid enough to be caught on the streets on the night of the hunt. So here I am, fighting my way through these moonlit streets, trying to find a valley to the east of Yharnam and the great bridge that will supposedly lead me to the Cathedral ward. As one townsperson told me, normally, they wouldn't let you near the place, but the hunt is on tonight. This might be your chance. I've learned that Ludwig was just the first of many healing church hunters, and what's telling is that many of them were clerics. The most damning piece of information, in my opinion, is that clerics turned into the most hideous beasts. When I see the cleric beast leap from the cathedral ward, I feel I am fighting what became of the first church hunter, Ludwig himself. The lesson I take from this encounter is that to be close to the church is to guarantee a transformation into a more complex and horrifying beast. Perhaps, I speculate, the more insight you have into the church's profane doings, the more complicated and monstrous your transformation becomes. This is a theme I believe is worth keeping in mind as I continue to explore, because I have a strong feeling it will continue. After the cleric beast is defeated, I find that one can obtain the Hunter Chief emblem, an item that I'm told belonged to the captain of the church hunters long ago. This emblem opens one of the main church gates in the church courtyard, a gate that would close behind Ludwig every time he went out to hunt in Yharnam. It would only open again upon the presentation of his Hunter Chief emblem. But I believe that gate has been closed for a very long time, for Ludwig never returned. He became the cleric beast, and even though Ludwig, in my view, gave his own humanity to lead the hunt, the abandoned villagers saw only the church's cowardice. A note I found puts it plainly. When the hunt began, the healing church abandoned us, blocking the great bridge to the cathedral ward, as they burned old Yharnam to the ground on that moonlit night. When I try to cross it, I find the great bridge is, of course, still blocked, just as the note said. This forces me to find a different, more treacherous way to the cathedral ward. It's down in the filth of the sewers that I meet Eileen, a veteran hunter who tells me that tonight is one of the worst hunts she has ever seen. Her words are a stark warning. Prepare yourself for the worst. There are no humans left. They're all flesh-hungry beasts now. I notice she stands beside an incense lantern, and I deduce that the incense must spread a scent that repels beasts. I've seen these lanterns outside the homes of the Yharnamites who have managed to survive this long. It's a simple rule I've learned to live by. Wherever you see a lantern, there is safety from the beasts, and the people cowering inside are safe as long as their supply of incense holds. I come across another lantern later, one that I see is protecting a little girl from the horrors outside. Her father, I learn, is a man named Gascoigne, a hunter who went on a hunt and never returned. It is my unfortunate fate to find him at the end of the sewers, in the Tom of Aden, where he appears to be harvesting the blood of other beasts. To me, Gascoigne is the perfect, tragic example of a man gone mad from the hunt. It's obvious he has forgotten his child, and I believe he has even killed his own wife. I also have to remember what I've learned. Those of the church turn into the most hideous beasts. The description of his attire tells me a story. Hunter attire worn by Father Gascoigne. The dingy scarf was once a holy shawl and a symbol of the healing church, from which Gascoigne would eventually part ways. Father is a title used for clerics in a foreign land, but there is no such rank in the healing church. His attire is so similar to the standard hunter garb from the workshop, yet I sense it's tainted by a pungent, beastly stench that seems to be eating away at him. So I have to ask myself, why did Gascoigne leave the church? Was it a noble act, a desire to raise the family he had at home? Or was it because he discovered he disagreed with the church's new, twisted teachings? What this all tells me is that there is much more to the healing church than there seems. And so I find myself stumbling through a fine haze of blood and truth, a waking dream where the sacred and the profane have become one. There is a tempting whisper in the air here, a voice that urges me not to think too hard about it all. It promises a simple, bloody clarity.
Don't think too hard about all of this. Just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for your own good.
This, I believe, is the hunter's creed, the final justification for an endless cycle of violence. It's not just what hunters do, it's what they become, cogs in a machine of purification, forever chasing a transcendence that only pulls them deeper into the intoxicating gore of the hunt. And from the chaos of the beast hunt, we turn to one man who dares to stand against it, Jura of Old Yharnam. Perched high above the burning streets, rifle in hand, he watches the slaughter below with a conviction few hunters share. In this chapter, we'll explore why Jura defends the very beasts others seek to kill, the tragedy behind his cause, and what his defiance says about the true nature of the hunt. In my mind, the tragedy of Old Yharnam is a ghost story whispered on the wind, a tale of a city poisoned not just by a plague, but by the very promise of its cure. It's a story of salvation that wore the mask of damnation, where the line between medicine and venom was not merely blurred, but erased entirely by a tide of tainted blood, leaving behind nothing but embers and a chilling, unanswerable question. I firmly believe the people of Old Yharnam were dying. They had a name for their suffering, ashen blood, a truly baffling sickness that ravaged the town. It isn't hard for me to imagine what the symptoms were, and I think the only treatment they had were these little white tablets, which, even then, only offered the most temporary relief. To me, it's clear they weren't a cure, not by a long shot. So when the healing church appeared on the scene, proclaiming salvation through their blood transfusions, it feels like it came at the perfect, perhaps too perfect, time. And just like that, the people were supposedly cured of their ashen blood ailment. I see the church's miracle cure quickly becoming the pride of Yharnam and the envy of every outsider. It's my understanding that people would travel from far and wide just for a chance at blood ministration. This, in my opinion, is how the healing church gained such unprecedented power, built on the faith of its desperate people. But don't you think this is all just too convenient? That there would be a sickness of the blood, that this ailment would only affect the populace of Old Yharnam, and that the healing church was just ready and waiting with transfusions that could cure anything. No, I'm not buying it. I believe it's entirely possible the healing church poisoned the populace of Old Yharnam with the ashen blood ailment themselves. The evidence seems to point that way. The poison knife description tells us that poison was a weapon of the church. The antidote tablets the people used happened to cure poison, and it's a fact that underneath Old Yharnam runs a water supply that could have been easily tainted. Honestly, what better way could there be to create a community so ready to accept the miracle of the healing church, regardless of what you believe? It's an undeniable fact that the ashen blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. And since Old Yharnam was one of the first places to be treated with the old blood, it makes perfect sense to me that its people were among the first to turn. This is where the hunters come in. The hunter's workshop, as I understand it, existed to fight this scourge of beasts. It was essentially one branch of the church, and it was run by Gehrman, the first hunter. Even the hunter's workshop itself consisted of different factions, each, in my view, with its own ideas on how to hunt beasts. One of these factions, and the one I find most fascinating, were the powder keg hunters, the bearers of the powder keg badge. These powder kegs are credited with wild creations like the cannon, the rifle spear, and the stake driver. I'd even wager they invented Molotov cocktails, since these are unlocked when you get their badge. The late powder kegs had a motto that I think speaks volumes about their character. If a weapon ain't got kick, it just ain't worth it. It's no surprise to me that they were labeled heretics by the rest of the workshop, who clearly spurned their crude genius, but you simply can't deny they had character. And one of these very powder keg hunters was a man named Jura. He was said to have been an uncommonly kind and dreadfully foolish man. What's more, he wasn't just any hunter. I'm certain he was a hunter of the dream. To me, this means the hunter's dream sustained him, allowing him to suffer little consequence from death and enabling him to venture out into the waking world from the safety of another realm. Who knows for how long he did this, or for what reasons. I can only surmise that perhaps he once saw a great good in what the workshop was doing after all. Their hunting of beasts kept the populace safe. It can't have been too long, though, before everything got completely out of hand. A couple of people turning into beasts was one thing, but I believe when the blood moon descended, the very line between man and beast was blurred, and Old Yharnam, being one of the first places treated with the old blood, became severely overrun by beasts. At this point, I think secrecy was impossible, and it was no longer required. The only way to contain the beasts was to launch an all-out assault on Old Yharnam, and who better for that terrible job than the powder keg hunters? In the end, Old Yharnam was sealed off and set ablaze to prevent the spread of the beastly scourge. The town burned, and as I see it, so did the men, the women, the children, and the beasts trapped within it. The charred hunter set we find in the ruins tells a grim story. It was worn by the hunters who swept through after the flames subsided to hunt any victims who survived the inferno. It vividly mentions the stench of singed blood, the weaponry, the attire, and what I can only call the overenthusiasm of the powder kegs was clearly visible in the smoking debris that remained. There is little doubt in my mind that they were responsible for the purge. However, I don't think the hunters performed this purge eagerly. In fact, I see a definite reluctance in the notes they left behind. The red moon hangs low, and beasts rule the streets. Are we left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? As time passes, Central Yharnam becomes the heart of the city, and what was once Old Yharnam becomes this distant, smoldering, and forgotten memory. But when we venture down into those ruins, we find that one human still remains. Jura. His words echo with a profound warning.
You there! Hunter! Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once. Old Yharnam, burned and abandoned by men, is now home only to beasts. They are of no harm to those alive. Turn back, or the hunter will face the hunt.
It seems to me that Jura felt utterly defeated by what happened to Old Yharnam, so much so that he renounced his hunter's vows and pledged to never kill another beast. I believe this kind, foolish man found his true calling in protecting the very beasts of Yharnam from the hunter he used to be. He recognizes the player for what they are. It's my belief that no one truly knows the hunt's purpose. It's a surreal world watched over by a man who does not wish to be there, and inhabited by a doll who exists only to serve you. There is no real explanation for why we venture out and kill. For Jura, I think Old Yharnam was the moment he realized that hunters are no better than the beasts they've slain. And he's right, isn't he? If a beast is characterized by its mindless thirst for blood, then how are hunters really any different? It's a chilling thought that some beasts are even capable of speech and reason.
Die, die! Hunters are killers, nothing less. You call me a beast? A beast? What would you know? I didn't ask for this. You hunters have got more blood on your hands.
What Jura saw in the flames of Old Yharnam, I think, was the hunt's true face, a mirror reflecting his own monstrous image back at him. His final, desperate plea is the thesis of this entire nightmare. The things you hunt, they're not beasts, they're people.
I no longer dream, but I was once a hunter too. There's nothing more horrific than a hunt. In case you fail to realize, the things you hunt, they're not beasts, they're people. One day you will see. But remember one thing, you're not hunting beasts. It's you. You're the beast. Just think about what you're doing. It's utter madness.
He saw the madness for what it was, a cycle where men, drunk on blood and purpose, become the very monsters they swore to destroy. And so he stands his lonely vigil, a shepherd to the damned, forever whispering the truth that one day you too will see it's not the beasts you are hunting, it is yourself.